The importance of maritime trade for the global economy can't be understated. After all, roughly 80% of all goods transported worldwide are transported by sea. That's why global nations continuously invest in maritime infrastructure, striving to enhance their geopolitical influence by strategically controlling critical maritime routes. But there's a single country poised to become a key player in the future of maritime trade: Canada. Canada's promising future rests on a few essential factors: its extensive coastline, ice-free ports, and strategic location. However, none of these factors is as crucial as Canada's potential in the Arctic, the real reason this country is considered the future of maritime trade. Canada's control over the Arctic could unearth unprecedented opportunities for economic growth, resource extraction, and geopolitical influence on the global stage. If all goes according to plan, Canada could irreversibly reshape the global maritime trade dynamics. Of course, that's a big if. Why? Well, not all countries are exactly on board with Canada's aspirations in the Arctic, with the US being amongst them. But before diving into the challenges of Canada's ambitions, we'll first explore what it is about the Arctic that makes it such a coveted region in maritime trade. Let's start with the basics. The Arctic is a polar region located around the Earth's North Pole. This region encompasses the Arctic Ocean, adjacent seas, and parts of several countries. These are the countries and parts in question. Number 1 is the star of this video: Canada. Canada holds a substantial portion of the Arctic region, consisting of the Northwest Territories, Nunavut, Yukon, and the northern parts of several provinces. Canada's Arctic is home to about 150,000 inhabitants, most of which are indigenous. Number 2 is the Kingdom of Denmark, which consists of 3 parts: Denmark, the Faroe Islands, and Greenland. As you might know, the last part, Greenland, occupies a vast portion of the Arctic region. Interestingly though, Greenland, the world's largest non-continental island, is only 15% inhabitable, leaving room for just 17 towns and 58 villages. The rest of the area is covered in ice caps, as most of the Arctic is, or at least was. But we'll come back to this soon. For now, let's mention country number 3, Finland. Almost 1/3 of Finland's landmass lies above the Arctic Circle in the Lapland province. Still, this province is sparsely populated, accounting for only 3% of the country's population of 5.5 million. Other notable Finnish territories in the Arctic are Ostrobothnia and Kainuu. Number 4 is Iceland, the country of fire and ice. Though this country isn't technically a part of the Arctic continental mainland, its entire territory is in the Arctic region. The Arctic Circle, however, only passes through 2 of its territories: Grimsey Island, some 25 miles off the north coast of Iceland, and Kolpeinse, over 90 miles off the same coast. Country number 5 is Norway, whose landmass is nearly 50% in the Arctic territory. This mass includes the following: the Nordland, Troms, and Finnmark counties, the Svalbard archipelago, and the Jan Mayen Island. Approximately 490,000 people live in these Arctic territories, which is 1/10 of the total Norwegian population. But this isn't the only impressive figure in Norway's Arctic stats. The country's Arctic maritime area covers nearly 580,000 square miles, the equivalent of France, Germany, and Spain combined. Country number 6 is another Scandinavian nation, Sweden. Sweden's 2 northernmost counties, Västerbotten and Norrbotten, are considered Arctic territories. Though these territories comprise approximately 1/3 of the country's geographical area, they're populated with only 500,000 inhabitants, a tiny fraction of Sweden's total population of about 10 million. 2 more countries fall under the category of Arctic states. First up, and country number 7 on our list, is the Russian Federation. Over 15,000 miles of the Arctic coastline belong to this mighty nation. This includes the following territories: the Murmansk region, the Nenets, Yamal-Nenets, Komi Republic, and Chukotka Autonomous Okrugs in their entirety. There's the northern parts of the Arkhangelsk region, the Republic of Sakha, Yakutia, the Republic of Karelia, and Krasnoyarsk Krai municipalities, in addition to the islands and archipelagos in the Russian part of the Arctic Ocean. As many as 2.5 million Russian inhabitants live in these territories, accounting for almost half of the total population living in the Arctic. And finally, country number 8, which could play a huge role in Canada's future maritime endeavors, is the US. The US officially became an Arctic nation after purchasing Alaska in 1867. The country's territories above the Arctic Circle include the following: the North Slope Borough, the Northwest Arctic Borough, and the Nome Census Area. The US has varied interests in the Arctic, with maritime trade recently gaining more prominence among them. But what makes the Arctic so crucial in maritime trade? The answer is simple. This region opens up new shipping routes and seemingly boundless opportunities. Unfortunately, these come at a colossal cost. You see, the only reason these opportunities arise is the melting of Arctic ice, a direct consequence of global climate change. The melting of the Arctic ice could wreak havoc on the world. For instance, it could sink countries like Tuvalu and the Maldives by the end of this century. However, many have perceived one consequence of the melting Arctic ice as positive. Where there once was ice, there's now navigable water. The more the ice melts, the more developed massive transit routes through the Arctic get. This primarily concerns two routes: the Northwest Passage, or NWP, and the Northern Sea Route, NSR. But we'll discuss these routes in more detail later in the video. For now, let's explore the effects of the increased navigability of the Arctic region. Of course, only one of these effects matters for the purposes of this video: the increase in Arctic traffic. Between 2013 and 2019, the number of single vessels entering the Arctic area increased by 25%. Soon, you'll learn why the year 2013 was monumental in the context of Arctic shipping. In the Canadian Arctic, fishing vessels and cargo ships led this incredible boost of traffic, rising by 106.2% and 122% from 2009 to 2019, respectively. All in all, the total traffic in the Canadian Arctic was multiplied by 1.92 in the same period. It nearly doubled. More importantly, these figures show no signs of slowing down. In fact, experts predict that nearly 5% of the total shipping trade worldwide could be deployed through the Arctic region by 2050. This means that whoever controls the maritime passages through this region stands to gain tremendous economic and geopolitical advantages. As things currently stand, Canada is poised to be the country in charge of this critical region, as the Northwest Passage primarily runs through its territory. In other words, Canada considers this passage a part of the Canadian internal waters. Of course, not all nations agree with this classification. But before exploring the challenges surrounding the claims on the Northwest Passage, let's see why this route is such a hot commodity. The Northwest Passage is a shipping route connecting the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, subsequently making shipping from Asia and North America significantly faster and cheaper. With this in mind, it shouldn't be surprising that finding this passage was one of the primary quests of early explorers seeking more efficient trade routes between Europe and Asia. These quests go as far back as Christopher Columbus's time. Columbus sought a navigable passage as a trade route to Asia, but was blocked by either ice, rough waters, or the Americas. These attempts would go on for centuries, unsuccessful each time, making explorers believe that the Northwest Passage was nothing but a myth. This all changed in 1906 when Roald Amundsen, a Norwegian explorer, and 6 of his crew members successfully passed through the entire Northwest Passage. It took them 3 years to travel from Norway to Herschel Island, Canada, but every second of this voyage was well worth it, as it marked a historic achievement in the Arctic exploration. However, it's important to note that Amundsen's ship, the Gjoa, was a small vessel that could easily navigate the intricate channels and shallow waters of the Northwest Passage. Over a century would pass before a commercial vessel had a successful journey through this passage. This honor belonged to the MS Nordic Orion, a Danish bulk carrier that traversed the almost ice-free Northwest Passage from Vancouver, Canada to Pori, Finland in 2013 instead of going through the Panama Canal. This move shortened the crew's journey by 4 days, allowed the ship to take 25% more cargo, and saved as much as $80,000 in fuel costs. This historic journey was responsible for one more crucial thing: a proposed route from east to west. Here's what this route would look like step by step, or better yet, stop by stop. The journey would start in the Davis Strait in Nunavut, Canada. From there, the ship would travel north through Baffin Bay into the Canadian archipelago. After crossing through this archipelago, the ship can continue toward the Beaufort Sea. The Chukchi Sea is next in line, and the ship could use it to exit into the Bering Strait, separating Russia and Alaska. For now, this route is sometimes only possible with an icebreaker escort, although some vessels have made the journey without one. But if the Arctic ice continues melting at the same rate, the region could be ice-free in the summer months in the near future, eliminating the need for this type of escort completely. Though scientists are still debating when this could happen, most agree that the Northwestern Passage could become substantially more accessible between 2040 and 2059. When this happens and the Arctic fully opens for maritime transport, shipping patterns worldwide will change irreversibly. After all, why would a ship traveling from Japan to Western Europe travel 13,000 miles through the Suez Canal when it can pass through the Bering Strait and slash its journey by as many as 6,000 miles? That's almost half the distance of the original journey, which in turn means half the cost. Talk about a game changer! Of course, this also means that the Suez and Panama Canals would likely experience a significant shift in their role, significance, and, naturally, revenue. At the same time, the Northwest Passage would see an impressive increase in traffic, influence, and revenue. The same goes for the country controlling it. Now, the Arctic countries are generally friendly toward each other, with established cooperative frameworks like the Arctic Council. But with so many economic and geopolitical benefits in the balance, maintaining this camaraderie may face tests. To make matters worse, the 8 countries we listed at the beginning of this video aren't the only ones that could seek a stake in the Arctic's potential opportunities. You see, besides the 8 member states of the Arctic Council, there are also 12 observer states. However, one among these has the most to gain from the changing dynamics in the Arctic: China. As an economy based primarily on manufacturing for the Western world, China sees the Arctic as the crucial arena for economic opportunities. After all, the Northwest Passage would make the Western world immensely more accessible, shortening shipping times and costs. This would in turn help renew their competitiveness as rivaling countries like Vietnam and Bangladesh threaten to undercut China's manufacturing dominance. With this in mind, none of these recent moves should come as a surprise. In 2016, China's Maritime Safety Administration published a 356-page guide on navigating the Northwest Passage. In 2018, China's officials declared the country a near-Arctic nation. And in 2023, China's first domestically built polar icebreaker, Xuelong 2, entered the Arctic Circle to begin a scientific expedition. Sure, China claims that it would respect any international laws put in place. However, given the country's track record with territorial claims and disputes, you would be justified in approaching such assurances with skepticism. But what about the Arctic Council member states? Well, the Northwestern Passage goes through the waters of 3 countries: Canada, the US, and the Kingdom of Denmark. However, arguably the most significant conflict in this regard is between the US and Canada. This probably comes as a surprise to anyone familiar with the history between these 2 countries, as they've always maintained a friendly relationship, at least on the surface. The problem lies in the designation of the Northwestern Passage. As previously mentioned, Canada considers this passage to be an internal waterway. The US, however, advocates for the Northwestern Passage to be declared an international waterway, allowing for complete freedom of navigation. This is conventionally done when a navigation choke point might restrict specific countries from accessing an ocean. By declaring this waterway as an international strait, all nations are granted unrestricted passage for their ships, without interference from the coastal state. Take the Danish Straits as an example. Even though they're fully surrounded by Denmark, they've been declared international waterways to grant the Scandinavian and Baltic countries access to the ocean. The same goes for the Danube River, which offers ocean access to landlocked countries like Austria, Hungary, and Serbia. According to Canada, the Northwestern Passage significantly differs from the previous examples. The main difference? The passage's usefulness. You see, Canada argues that a significant number of ships had to traverse a route successfully before it could be declared an international waterway. In the case of the Northwestern Passage, this figure has only reached double digits. In addition, with no country in charge of the Northwestern Passage, this route can be quite a dangerous endeavor. Why? There are no search and rescue capabilities nearby. This means that if a ship went through this passage blindly and encountered a problem, timely assistance and rescue operations would be near impossible. However, if Canada were to charge passage fees similar to those for the Panama or Suez Canals, it would have both the resources and the responsibility to implement a robust search and rescue system to police the route. But then again, the total control over the Northwestern Passage would allow Canada to essentially dictate which ships are permitted to pass. This, in turn, means that the country would have a huge influence on the economies of major manufacturing nations. Let's say Canadian officials decide to ban Chinese ships from traversing the Northwestern Passage while granting access to the Vietnamese ones. This single move would make Chinese goods uncompetitive for the Western markets, dealing a major blow to the country's economy. This scenario makes it even more evident why this issue is so contentious. However, most experts familiar with Canada's operations in maritime shipping fully trust that Canada would adhere to international laws and regulations, maintaining a fair and unbiased approach to the management of the Northwestern Passage. After all, we're talking about a country that was a founding member of the International Maritime Organization, the IMO, in 1948, which sets the global standards for safe, secure, and environmentally sound shipping practices worldwide. In December of 2023, the country was re-elected to the IMO Council, continuing its work in various fields of international maritime shipping. Interestingly and importantly, one of these fields is also the Arctic cooperation and protection of polar waters. Canada spearheaded the development of the International Code for ships operating in polar waters, or the Polar Code for short, establishing safety and environmental standards for ships operating in the challenging conditions of polar waters, including the Arctic. In 2024, the country also plans to propose the establishment of an Emissions Control Area, or ECA, in Canadian Arctic waters, aiming to mitigate the environmental impact and protect the valuable Arctic ecosystems integral to the Inuit way of life. Canada is also a leader in marine biotechnology that promises to yield groundbreaking discoveries in the future. Through the National Seafarers Welfare Board, this country also strives to enhance the well-being of seafarers, addressing the unique challenges of those working in the Arctic waters. Similarly, through investments in the Marine Training Program, Canada aims to attract more women, Indigenous people, and Northerners to pursue careers in the marine sector. Currently, women make up only about 1.2% of the global maritime workforce. All of these moves clearly signal one thing: Canada is serious about the maritime sector. This should put any doubts regarding its commitment to responsible maritime shipping in the Arctic region to rest. Of course, all these initiatives and moves aren't simply out of the goodness of the Canadian officials' hearts. The truth is that maritime trade is a crucial part of the Canadian economy and way of life. After all, this country has the longest coastline in the world and ports of call in the Atlantic, Pacific, and Arctic Oceans, as well as the Great Lakes. In 2022 alone, marine trade directly generated nearly 30,000 jobs while reaching a value of $345 billion. This figure meant that Canada was responsible for 23% of the total international trade. In the same year, ports and marine shipping brought in $194 billion of Canada's total imports by value, while accounting for $151 billion of its exports. During this year, Canada port authorities handled almost 340 million tons of total cargo volume. Even with these mind-blowing figures, the maritime sector holds a lot more untapped potential for Canada and its economy. With over 1.35 million square miles of Arctic territories under its control, it's clear that the Arctic region is key to that potential. With the opening of the Northwestern Passage, Canada could stimulate its historically underdeveloped regions in the far north. Also, if a large portion of the world's maritime traffic headed through the passage, these regions would quickly become vital shipping, trade, and logistics hubs, boosting their population. With all of this in mind, we have one more question to answer. How can Canada prepare for the opening of the Northwestern Passage to shipping? Currently, there are no agreements policing who can and can't pass through the Northwestern Passage. The only existing agreements are between the US and Canada. For instance, the 1988 Arctic Cooperation Agreement dictates that the US must request Canada's consent to send an icebreaker through the Northwest Passage. However, with the increased monetary gain on the table, it seems that the US has started disregarding this agreement. This only reinforces the need for a new one, which wouldn't necessarily be limited to the US. This agreement would reflect Canada's policy that the Northwest Passage belongs to its internal waters, and as such, it's fully under the country's control. It's also worth mentioning that Canadian officials never even implied that this passage would be off-limits for specific countries. All they said was that the journey through this passage would be under Canada's terms. Now, speaking of these terms, Canada has two options: charging passage fees and allowing free use of the Northwest Passage. Let's quickly break down each of these options. Charging fees to users of the Northwest Passage would bring two major benefits to Canada. One, it would reduce the number of ships traversing the passage, thus protecting the Arctic ecosystem and its people. And two, the country could raise money for numerous maritime endeavors, from investments in search and rescue capabilities to environmental conservation initiatives. Canada could also use this money to help Indigenous people continue living their lifestyle. This option would likely make the passage through the Arctic financially unsustainable for many groups and companies. This means that Canada probably wouldn't impose any other specific regulations on the users of the Northwest Passage. In other words, charging them is enough. This move could possibly appease nations disagreeing with Canada's ownership claims over the Northwest Passage, as it would restrict their travels only monetarily. For option number 2, Canada would allow free use of the Northwest Passage. Of course, by free, we mean free of charge, as this option would likely come with other limitations regarding safety, the environment, and navigation. Still, a free passage would likely attract significantly more ships from all over the world, increasing Canada's standing with other nations. After all, Canada would be the country that allowed them substantially cheaper trade. Among these nations, Canada would probably benefit from Asian partnerships the most. Asian companies viewed the Northwest Passage as the ideal opportunity to reduce costs and expand their business. If they were allowed to use it and do so for free, they would likely be more open to bilateral agreements that would immensely benefit Canada in the long run. Of course, opening the Northwest Passage to free trade comes with numerous environmental threats. Oil spills, pollution, and noise interference are just some of them. These threats could severely impact the traditional way of life for the Inuit people. That's not to mention how damaging they would be for the environment, setting Canada's green initiatives back considerably. Based on these factors, you could probably conclude that the first option would be significantly more beneficial for Canada and its people in the long run. Now, there's just the small issue of getting other nations, chiefly the United States, to agree to Canada's stance on the Northwest Passage. Many experts believe that the US should and will eventually accept Canada's claim on the Northwest Passage. Why? Because this is the only way to prevent China and Russia from laying claims to the same region. These two countries have already been making somewhat aggressive moves, and the last thing the US wants is to see the Arctic fall into the hands of nations with potentially conflicting interests. If the Northwestern Passage was officially considered part of Canada, the country could protect it, possibly even with the help of the US Navy. But what do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if this video interested you, feel free to check out the real reason the US bought Alaska from Russia, or this other video you might like. Thanks for watching. Ever wondered why ships don't sail around the southern tip of Africa? Well, it all comes down to the Cape of Good Hope, a place that doesn't live up to its name. It's actually more appropriate to call it by its other name, the graveyard of ships. It's no surprise most of the world's ships avoid sailing under Africa. In fact, they tried to avoid this route for thousands of years. And it all began with one of the most famous ghost ship stories of all time. You've likely heard about the Flying Dutchman. The tale goes that in the 17th century, a Dutch captain, perhaps named Van der Decken, was on his way home from the Far East, carrying a cargo he could sell at a big profit in Europe. Unfortunately, to get there, he had to sail around Africa, and that meant facing the Cape of Good Hope. He had the misfortune of reaching it right in the middle of a raging storm, struggling to push his ship through one of the most treacherous stretches of ocean in the world. The legends go that in order to complete his journey safely, he had to resort to making a pact. Some versions of the story say it was a deal with the devil. Some stories say that his efforts at preserving his safety through some other evil means condemned him with a divine curse. Either way, he never made it home. He's now destined to wander the seas forever, bringing forebodings of doom to any navigator that spots the ghostly light of the Dutchman's ship on these rough waves. Sightings of the fabled ship continued at least into the 20th century. There's even a train ride named after him, which you'll come across if you decide to take a Cape Point tour. Reports about actual ghost ships are rarer now because sailors have a better understanding of the science of optics. But the Flying Dutchman stories actually go far in explaining all the real reasons why modern ships don't like passing under Africa. Just look at the shipping data. Between 15 and 20,000 vessels transit under Africa via the Cape of Good Hope every year, with an estimated 1.6 billion tons worth of cargo. That might sound like a lot until you realize that in 2022, there were an estimated 102,000 ships globally, and 12.3 billion tons of cargo moved in 2023. Put in that context, the Cape route's limited popularity becomes much more apparent. One reason? If you need to take your ship under Africa, you might feel just like the Flying Dutchman, doomed to skim the waves forever. To understand why, look at a small rebel group known as the Houthis, whose destructive hobby involves firing anti-ship missiles at commercial vessels. They operate in a stretch of high-stakes real estate between the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, one of the most critical trade routes on the planet. The top of the Red Sea hosts one of the most important places in the world. It's right here, the Suez Canal, which an average of 50 ships pass through every day. But that's only the average. Hundreds of ships might be waiting at any given time, because 10% of the world's total maritime trade passes through this channel. It's a narrow place though, only 674 feet, 205 meters wide, and this can pose some serious vulnerabilities to the global economy. Remember that ship that got stuck here in 2021? Strong winds knocked it off course, and because it was longer than the canal is wide, it blocked the entire passage for 6 days. It took a flotilla of tugboats to finally get it free. And just 2 years later, another huge cargo ship ran aground. This one only took 3 tugboats to get free. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief that it didn't straddle the channel, but it shows you just how delicate the canal is. Overall, ships and authorities on land have to communicate carefully to make sure the Suez Canal operates smoothly. So, why would so many ships risk going through that kind of hassle or even braving fire from the Houthis? Just look at the geography of Africa, and you'll see only one reason why. A journey through the Suez Canal means that a typical journey from Europe to Asia, or vice versa, is reduced by about 3,700 miles, nearly 6,000 kilometers on average. Not far away from the Suez Canal is the Persian Gulf. It's also one of the world's most important shipping routes. About 20% of the world's total oil consumption starts in this place. Over 40% of the world's natural gas goes through here too. If you were a captain tasked with getting this cargo to a port in Northern Europe, you have 2 options open to you: travel all the way around Africa or go through the Suez Canal. The trip around Africa would be around 13,000 miles, nearly 21,000 kilometers, and take 24 days. A trip through the canal would be about 7,500 miles, 12,000 kilometers, and take 14 days. Need to travel from Rotterdam to Mumbai? The Suez Canal reduces your round trip by 41%. London to Shanghai, 32%. Trips from Europe to Asia via the Cape of Good Hope used to take a year or more. Improvements in ship technology helped to change that, but even so, everyone in the world breathed a heavy sigh of relief when the Suez Canal opened in 1869. It was a grand occasion, with a church and a mosque built side by side to offer both Christian and Muslim blessings. It was the culmination of thousands of years of trials and failures, a dream that had once seemed impossible to the world's most powerful kings and emperors. The trip around Africa was so inconvenient, so harrowing and filled with danger that they were willing to think and build outside the box for a long, long time. But more on that later. For now, it helps just to remember that the construction of the modern Suez Canal took 10 years and 20,000 deaths. There was no doubt that the sacrifice had been worth it, because convenience is far from the only reason why ships prefer not to make the journey under Africa anymore. To find the more important reasons, start by zooming out and taking a look at a map of the entire world. Something will stand out immediately if you know what you're looking for. The Northern Hemisphere hosts a supermajority of the world's landmass, 68% to the Southern Hemisphere's 32%. 60% of the Northern Hemisphere is water, and 40% is land. It's a lot more lopsided down south, 80% to 20%. That means the currents and winds in the Southern Hemisphere can be a lot fiercer. The Cape of Good Hope is located at 34 degrees south latitude, but in fact, navigating it and passing all the way under Africa often requires ships to go further south, to waters that sailors ominously know as the Roaring Forties. The conditions that make up the Roaring Forties actually start far north of here, in the tropics. The air mass near the equator is warm, so it rises and tends to drift north or south towards the poles where cold air dominates. But unlike in the northern part of the world, there's not a lot of land to act as a windbreak down here. The rotation of the Earth further deflects the air southward and helps to accelerate the winds. So you wind up with frequent gale force east-west conditions toward the southerly latitudes. The further south you go, the faster and more violent the winds and currents can get. Wind speeds can reach 40 knots or 46 miles an hour, 76 kilometers an hour on average in this part of the world. The waves at the Cape of Good Hope alone, without going into the Roaring Forties, can be over 46 feet, 14 meters high in the most extreme conditions. The rough elements helped earlier sailors in one way. It sped them along on their journey from Europe to Asia. They called these passages the act of running the easting down. But there's a downside. You probably knew there would be a downside. Just ask the Flying Dutchman. Remember how it was a storm that forced him to make his pact with the devil? Well, that was oddly appropriate because it was the original name for this place, the Cape of Storms. It got that name from the first European to reach it, the Portuguese navigator Bartolomeu Dias, who came here on the 12th of March, 1488. So why don't we call it by that accurate name today? It all came down to 15th century marketing. King John II of Portugal understood how vital the Cape route would be to his nation's future prosperity. He didn't have the benefit of going through the Suez Canal as an alternative, and now here was his great navigator calling this critical place the Cape of Storms. Something needed to be done to attract more investment in this route, and quickly before word of the real nature of this place got out. So he named it the Cape of Good Hope. At a time when Europeans were trying to find new ways to reach India and the Far East thanks to the closing of the old Silk Road trade routes, it made for a more politically expedient name. And it was sort of accurate. It was the culmination of the long search for a more direct route to Asia, the thing that they had hoped for so long. The ad campaign was obviously a success for Portugal and then other European maritime powers. There was just one downside. The clever branding didn't erase the storms. The bad weather here is as frequent as it is intense. And it gets worse. The South African coastline has a whole host of treacherous rocks that mariners need to deal with offshore. There have been nearly 3,000 recorded shipwrecks around the Cape of Good Hope, and the dangers don't even stop at the rough conditions. There's something else lurking under the waves, sometimes at least, that could be even more frightening if you dare leave the safety of your ship. To find out what it is, start with a phrase you've probably heard of. Women and children first. Those words make for another famous maritime tradition that's been passed down from generation to generation, starting here at the Cape of Good Hope. It comes from the wreck of the HMS Birkenhead in 1852. There were 480 officers and men in the British Army on board, reinforcements for fighting against the Casa in the Eastern Cape. 26 women and children accompanied them. The ship was rounding the coast of South Africa over the night of February 26th. In the dark, it collided with an uncharted rock near a place appropriately now named Danger Point, east of Cape Town. The Birkenhead rapidly began to sink, so the women and children were ordered to be put in the lifeboats first. This effort was successful, but a second lifeboat was swamped, and a third couldn't be launched. So only 3 were left for the remaining officers and crew. That left only 2 options left for the unfortunates who were now left on board: abandon the Birkenhead or go down with it. Since jumping overboard might pose a danger to the lifeboats that were still there, Colonel Seton ordered his troops to stand fast and go down with the ship. In a testament to their discipline, the men calmly did just that. Once in the water, the troops lucky enough to not drown clung to debris or tried to swim for the shore. That's where they met that other danger, the one swimming right under them. South Africa's coastline is home to a large population of great white sharks. In 2011, it was estimated that there were around 500 and 1,000 of them lurking off the shore, but it would have been much higher in 1852. And now, they struck. Wave after wave of sharks attacked the struggling crew members that night. The troops called the relentless great whites Tommy sharks, as if they were soldiers like themselves. To this day, the locals still refer to their aquatic neighbors by that name. Only 193 of the people on the ship that night wound up surviving, but that figure included all of the women and children. Although largely forgotten today, the troops of the HMS Birkenhead were celebrated for their heroism and sacrifice. The Birkenhead drill of attending to the women and children first in the case of a shipwreck is still standard practice in maritime tradition and named in their honor. The Birkenhead story stands out to us for another reason. If you had to pick one of the worst places in the world to have a shipwreck, you now see why the Cape of Good Hope would be one of them. The shipwrecks didn't start or stop in 1852. They're actually so common that they're part of South Africa's tourism industry. Along one stretch of the South African coastline, there's a hiking trail, appropriately named Shipwreck Hiking Trail. Its locale saw at least 120 shipwrecks between 1682 and 1992. One of the more notable wrecks came in 1965, when a 347-ton Dutch coaster called the Nolith struck the appropriately named Albatross Rock. Fortunately, the incident wasn't nearly as tragic as the Birkenheads. The crew got to avoid the sharks because they had helicopters to save them. Even most of the cargo was spared, but it shows even though maritime technology has greatly improved, ships are still at the mercy of the elements that haven't changed. Giant, seemingly durable ships can still find their graves here. As late as 1994, a French barge carrying a huge crane was wrecked on the rocks. Too heavy to save, it needed to be abandoned. Now, you might be seeing why the misnamed Cape of Good Hope isn't as popular a trade route as it used to be. Little wonder why the ship that blocked the Suez Canal cost the global economy $400 million per hour. It's not just the longer route. Imagine the insurance rates on those goods having to pass through such risky conditions. But insurers would need to do more than calculate quotes based on the risks around the Cape of Good Hope. Passing under Africa means more than just going around the South African coastline. Africa is the world's second largest continent. There's a lot of coastline to pass around, and to even get to or from the Cape of Good Hope, you need to go through a place that a Portuguese king didn't bother to give a more appealing name. Just northwest of South Africa is its neighbor Namibia, and its shoreline can also be a place of danger. A part of it is so treacherous that it's gotten the name Skeleton Coast. There have been over 500 recorded shipwrecks in this part of the world. One park ranger interviewed in 2018 said that he'd come across 112 in just the 6 years that he was on the job. One look at the landscape of this place, and it's easy to see why. Although sailors here haven't reached the roaring 40s yet, Antarctic currents still bubble up in these waters. The locals warned the few passersby that these currents are powerful enough to take them 125 miles out to sea if they get the misguided idea of swimming too far from shore. Conditions are often foggy, too, which makes navigating even more challenging. And there are 11 different shark species swimming around offshore. And shipwrecked crews face another obstacle. Even if they manage to make it back to shore in one piece, there's a good chance they won't have a happily ever after like the women and children aboard the HMS Birkhead did. Those people had the benefit of territory that had already seen settlers come for hundreds of years. Namibia's Skeleton Coast, on the other hand, is almost entirely uninhabited. This place is a desert, and sometimes the currents are powerful enough to take ships far into it, and that's a bad place to be. How bad? Just take a look at the most famous shipwreck there. It was an ominous night in 1942. The captain of the 13,000-ton Dunedin Star, a ship loaded with explosives, 85 crew members, and 21 passengers, realized his vessel was in serious trouble off the coast of Namibia. The surf was rough. Waves here can reach over 11 feet, 3.3 meters in height, and over 6,500 feet, 1,900 meters long. In these conditions, the ship's keel scraped against a submerged shoal. The captain soon called for all hands on deck. To their horror, they would have found that they were still hundreds of feet away from the safety of the shore. They knew about the sharks and the strength of the current. One wonders if a few of them were thinking about the fate of the Birkenhead. The order came: abandon ship. There was just one problem. The ship only had a single lifeboat, a small motorcraft to take people to the shore. The Birkenhead drill of 90 years earlier was followed. 8 of the passengers were women, one of which was heavily pregnant and 3 with babies. These people were given priority in the evacuation. All of the passengers eventually made it to shore safely, but only half of the crew. The lifeboat didn't last more than 3 trips, and as it failed, the other half of the crew realized to their terror that they had been marooned. The doomed lifeboat was put to good use by serving as a makeshift shelter for the people on the shore against the sandy winds and scorching sun when daybreak finally came. The immediate problem had been solved, but there was only a limited amount of food and water, and the nearest port was Walvis Bay, 435 miles, 700 kilometers to the northwest. To this day, there is no sign of civilization for hundreds of miles in all directions, so the supplies were rationed, with each person surviving on a pittance. 3 days later, it looked like there would be relief in the form of a salvage ship, which took the marooned crew members aboard, but it couldn't reach the people on the shore, who now might have been wishing they stayed with the ship. More relief attempts came from land, sea, and sky. Each one was an odyssey of its own. A salvage tug, the Sir Charles Elliot, tried to reach the Dunedin Star, but this place is called the Skeleton Coast for a reason. It also ran aground before it could reach the site. Several lives were lost in this second shipwreck. Even a Ventura bomber that took off from Cape Town carrying some much-needed supplies became stuck in the sand after it pushed its luck too far and tried to land on the beach. Meanwhile, a convoy of 8 vehicles set out from Windhoek, but communications with it were soon lost. 3 more bombers had to be sent out to locate the Dunedin Star's survivors. A second convoy went out, and that first bomber, the crew managed to free it from the sand and get it into the air again, but the effort proved to be a Sisyphean task. It suffered engine failure and crashed into the sea. The crew fortunately survived and bobbed in the rough waves on the fuselage. They floated ashore and walked 31 miles, 50 kilometers to the Dunedin survivors on land. Fortunately, the tale has a happy ending. The first convoy didn't disappear into the sand. It reached the survivors and evacuated them. A month after that scary night, the survivors arrived safely in Windhoek. A few things have changed. If you were the captain of a lucky shipwreck today, you might find yourself near one of the few safari camps around the area. But you might also come across other dangers that fortunately didn't add to the trouble of the Dunedin's survivors. There's a river nearby, the Cunena. If you're a shipwreck survivor and want to take a bath here, it's probably best not to do so. There are crocodiles prowling in it. Meanwhile, on land, there are occasional lions, rhinos, and hyenas too. This place has safari camps for a reason. The shipwrecks continue. As recently as 2008, a fishing trawler named the Zela was stranded here. You can still see it. You can still see the rusting wreck of the Dunedin Star too, provided you're brave enough to come to a place that some people call the end of the earth. But we still haven't exhausted our list of reasons why ships don't pass under Africa yet. If you manage to get around both the Skeleton Coast and the Cape of Good Hope, there are yet more dangers waiting for you on the East Coast, starting with those concentrated around what might be the world's most unique island. There are things in Madagascar that you won't find anywhere else. Evidence for human presence on the island only goes back 11,000 years, and no one really knows yet if that presence was permanent. The earliest evidence of settled communities only goes back 1,000 years. Either way, humans only started to come here remarkably late in their time on Earth. Why? Especially when humans were living on the mainland just across the strait for hundreds of thousands of years. It could be because to get to Madagascar, you have to cross the Mozambique Channel, and it's one of the world's more dangerous shipping lanes. So maybe our ancestors knew better. The channel has a rough southerly current. The waters here are warm, with average temperatures over 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 20 Celsius. They're also strong, flowing down into the Agulhas Current on the eastern coast of South Africa. You probably know what these conditions can lead to. The Mozambique Channel is a hotspot for hurricanes. Just go back to 2019 to see how destructive they can be. On March 4th, Cyclone Idai formed in the Mozambique Channel. Wind speeds reached 115 miles an hour, 185 kilometers an hour at its peak intensity. Over 1,000 people across Mozambique, Malawi, and Zimbabwe perished when it hit. Hundreds of thousands were displaced. The storm was the second costliest in the region, too, with the World Bank estimating at least $2 billion in total economic losses. Cyclone Idai was one of the worst, but it was far from the first. 3 to 12 cyclones form every year in the channel itself, but that isn't the end of the danger. Cyclones can form elsewhere and then wander into it, strengthening rapidly because of the warm and deep water. But if you were an insurer trying to make a quote for cargoes passing through the Mozambique Channel, you'd now need to reckon with artificial dangers to go along with the natural ones. Mozambique has been dealing with an Islamist insurgency in its Cabo Delgado province since 2017. The group responsible is called Al-Shabaab, or Ansar al-Sunnah, which pledged its loyalty to ISIS in 2015. The terror group looked to the sea early. Drug smuggling through the Mozambique Channel has become big business for them. And Mozambique has few naval resources to call on to counter the group's maritime activities. The South Africans have sent ships there to assist, but Mozambique doesn't want to get too dependent on their neighbor. The dangers don't end there, though. There's a curious place in the Mozambique Channel that we haven't discussed yet, and it's a preview of the things that sailors voyaging up the east coast of Africa will still experience. This is Mozambique Island, a 0.5 square mile, 1.3 square kilometer place separated from the mainland by only 1.8 miles, 2.9 kilometers, surrounded by crystal clear blue seas. Underneath these Instagram-worthy waters lie the wrecks of at least 30 ships. Treasure hunters swarmed the place looking for loot until 2014, when the efforts of a local archaeologist named Ricardo Duarte succeeded in running them out of town, or whatever's left of it. Those shipwrecks are the clue to the bigger danger lying off the coast of East Africa. There are at least 300 shipwrecks, ranging from the late 17th century to the present. Sure, it's not quite as dramatic as the records around the Cape of Good Hope or Namibia's Skeleton Coast, but if you're sailing these parts, it's still best not to let your guard down. East Africa is rugged, full of coral reefs with few natural anchorages. The first major shipwreck came in 1499, when the Portuguese galleon San Rafael ran aground and burned at Ntogoni in modern Tanzania. Many of the shipwrecks came from human error, including sea pilots that underestimated the forces of nature out here. But there are more famous dangers here. Somalia has more coastline than any other country on the African mainland, at about 1,880 miles, 2,897 kilometers. If you were to compare that coast with a map of the continental United States, it would stretch from the Florida Panhandle up to southern New York State, and then west into Michigan. That's bad news for the world's mariners because Somalia has been in a state of civil war since the 1980s. The borders you'd see on your map don't accurately reflect the military situation in the country. The internationally recognized federal government of Somalia is only in control of a small part of its supposed territory. The rest is divided between the autonomous region of Puntland, the self-declared but unrecognized Republic of Somaliland, and various Islamist militant groups. That means there's a lot of coastline in Somalia that's lacking in public order. Meanwhile, the average annual income in this part of the world is only about $590 as of June of 2025. You can probably guess what these two things come together to produce. Somalia is one of the world's most popular pirate havens. Everyone knows the most famous pirate incident in recent memory, when the Maersk Alabama, under the command of Captain Richard Phillips, was hijacked 276 miles, 444 kilometers off Ale, Somalia, in April of 2009. But not all piracy incidents get movies made about them. The so-called Captain Phillips case was only the beginning of a trend. Pirate activity there peaked in 2011, with 160 attacks recorded that year. There were 358 in the period between 2010 and 2015. Things looked like they were starting to settle down in 2016 amidst increased international patrols following 7 anti-piracy UN Security Council resolutions. Those resolutions meant that the pirates were staring in the face of foreign navies and air forces that were now permitted to patrol the waters off the Somali coast. Those measures expired on December 3, 2021, and at least for a little while, things looked okay. But there's been a recent resurgence. At least 5 incidents occurred off Somalia in the first quarter of 2024 alone. Activity has become more intense than any of the previous 6 years, according to Britain's Royal United Services Institute, a security-related think tank. You can probably blame the Houthis for the resurgence. By January of 2024, 354 container ships were choosing to avoid the Suez Canal and go around the Cape of Good Hope instead. With all that wealth nearby and the easing of the international anti-piracy measures, the temptations proved too much. And here's the thing about the pirates in Somalia. They don't stay in Somalia. They have a long reach because there's so much coastline for them to choose from. In March of 2024, Somali pirates hijacked a ship on the way from Mozambique to the United Arab Emirates. They were over 620 miles, 998 kilometers away from their home waters and wound up with a $5 million ransom payment. And that's not even the longest attack on record. They've hijacked ships over 1,100 miles, 1,770 kilometers away from their homeland. They've been deep into the Indian Ocean, into the Gulf of Aden up to Saudi Arabia, and south to Madagascar. So, let's say you're a ship captain coming from Asia on the way to Europe and you've chosen to avoid the Suez Canal for fear of the Houthis. If you make it to the Cape, it means you've avoided the Somali pirates, but you're still in for some bad news. It turns out that Somali pirates aren't the only pirates that could give you a hard time on your journey. The people living near the Gulf of Guinea have it better than their counterparts in Somalia, but their average income here is still small. If you live in Gabon, you might expect a yearly income of just under $8,000, or around $4,800 if you're in Equatorial Guinea. Don't expect much over $2,000 if you live in one of the other countries on this shoreline. No surprise then that illegal fishing is rampant, but that's not the only illegal activity that's popular around here. The Gulf of Guinea is yet another pirate hotspot. It's actually been an even more pirate-prone place than Somalia over the last decade. There are a lot of prizes for the pirates to win out here. It has 25% of Africa's internal maritime traffic and plenty of oil and gas extraction. With so much wealth and so much poverty being so close together, it's little wonder why piracy rose in the Gulf so quickly. 2020 was the peak year for pirates here, with 2 incidents in the first quarter alone. 130 of the world's 135 maritime kidnappings took place here. In 2021, it made up 43% of the world's total piracy incidents. And the pirates have been known to go far. Not quite as far as their Somali counterparts, but far. In 2021, the furthest known attack came from 242 miles, 389 kilometers south of Cotonou, when the pirates kidnapped 15 crew members of a Maltese chemical tanker. So why aren't they being stopped? Well, the countries along the Gulf of Guinea don't have the highest level of trust in each other and are unlikely to tolerate outside naval presences in their territorial waters. The long coastline of Somalia allowed for a more concentrated effort to suppress the pirates there. It's not the same in the Gulf of Guinea. Meanwhile, the states involved lack the necessary security architecture to suppress the organized criminal enterprises that sponsor these pirates. There are a lot of local officials in on the act, too. The web of crime runs from corrupt security services personnel to political officials to foreign traders and financiers. Piracy-related incidents declined sharply after 2020, but that was partially because of the pandemic-era slowdown in international trade. After bottoming out in 2023, the first quarter of 2024 saw an uptick. Now, with more ships being forced to sail the long way around Africa, there's great temptation. It's little wonder why people have gotten so creative in trying to avoid going under Africa whenever they could, even since ancient times. The Egyptians knew the dangers, so they tried to build their own Suez Canal. There was once the Canal of the Pharaohs, which Aristotle said started as far back as the 19th century BC, under the reign of the Egyptian king Senusret III. The canal didn't connect directly to the Mediterranean. Instead, the course was supposed to start at the city of Pelusium on the northeast bank of the Nile. From there, you would go downriver to Zagazig, just north of where the Great River splits apart. The proposed canal would then take you past Hierapolis to the Bitter Lakes. A smaller channel would then be dug from there to the Red Sea. It might have been indirect, but it was much better than going around Africa. Just ask Pharaoh Necho II, who Herodotus reports sent the first known expedition around the continent in search of a more desirable trade route to Asia. Unfortunately, both Senusret III and Necho II ran into problems with their canal. The sea was higher than the land, and they feared a deluge of saltwater into the Nile that would ruin irrigation. 10,000 men died in the attempt to reopen the canal. But the hope stayed alive. Darius the Great came along and also worked on the canal. He has inscriptions to prove it. Whether he completed it or not is subject to debate. Ptolemy II later used waterlocks to solve the pesky land higher than the water problem. Strabo reported that the canal was about 164 feet, 50 meters wide. But there was something badly wrong with this great achievement. Centuries later, the Roman Emperor Trajan had to make repairs to the canal. It fell into disuse. The canal stayed open in one form or another until 767, when the Abbasid Caliph al-Mansur closed it to shut down supply routes between his enemies in Egypt and Arabia. Apparently, the place was never as significant to global trade as Senusret originally hoped for, so it was expendable. It was then forgotten for 1,000 years. In the meantime, the Venetians and the Mamluks tried to build an entirely different canal to solve the same problem. Construction began in 1586, but it would quickly end in failure. Louis XIV thought about trying his hand too, but ultimately left it in the realm of fantasy. Then, another great ruler came around. Napoleon discovered the ancient canal and wanted to build a modern version. Construction got underway in 1799, but there was just one problem. The French engineers thought that the Red Sea was about 33 feet, 10 meters higher than the Mediterranean, so it ended in another failure. The latest modern attempt started in 1859 and succeeded 10 years later. The dream of Senusret III had at last become a reality. But the dream of avoiding the route around Africa at any cost isn't over yet. The 2021 incident and the Houthis are keeping the dream alive. The trip around the continent is so forbidding that Russia is hoping to cash in on the opening of the Northeast Passage, and China is eager to help its troubled strategic partner along. As the ice slowly melts, the waters here have become more navigable. Between 2013 and 2023, the recorded annual distances of ships in this remote about place went from 6.1 million miles, 9.8 million kilometers, to 12.9 million miles, 20.7 million kilometers. The Arctic sea routes mean that ships don't have to go around Africa if something goes wrong with the Suez Canal route. Compared to that journey, the cold doesn't seem that bad. Anything to avoid the graveyard of ships. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. It really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MapPack. Get ready, because this is a big one. Today, we're bringing you the most amazing facts about every single country on Earth. So, using the UN count of 195 countries, here we go. Afghanistan. Afghanistan has changed its flag more than any other country in the world, over 25 times since its independence in 1919. This is a reflection of the unfortunate lack of political stability that has plagued Afghanistan for over 100 years, not to mention King Amanullah's tendency to introduce new flag designs every time he saw a foreign one he liked during his reign. Albania. In 1967, Albania was declared the world's first atheist state by its communist dictator Enver Hoxha. The country's population was a mix of Christians and Muslims at the time, but Hoxha ordered the military to seize churches and mosques and destroy them or convert them to other uses, like movie theaters. Hoxha died in 1985. Today, Albania is a religiously tolerant state. Algeria. Iced coffee was invented in Algeria. That's right, one of the most popular beverages in the world started here on the borders of the Sahara in 1840. The French soldiers who invented it called it massacran. It was a sweet coffee they quickly cooled down with ice so they could stay alert but also refreshed in the sweltering North African climate. Andorra. Only half of Andorran residents are Andorran nationals. The other half is made of Spanish, French, and Portuguese people. Spanish people make up 24.8% of the country's population. So what's the national language given this mix, you may ask? Well, Catalan, obviously. Angola. Angola has an important shortage of men. After decades of civil war, the proportion of men to women in the country aged 15 to 64 in 2023 was 0.93. This means that even though they're against the law, polygamous arrangements have become socially acceptable throughout the country. Antigua and Barbuda. The Caribbean nations of Antigua and Barbuda has a beach for every day of the year. It's known as the Land of 365 Beaches, which is a lot of beaches for a country of almost 93,800 people in 170 square miles, or 440 square kilometers. One of the most famous strips of land is 17-mile, or 27-kilometer, Pink Sand Beach in Barbuda, formed by crushed shells and coral. Argentina. Most people know Argentina for its steaks, its soccer stars, or as the home of the tango. But Argentina has another special distinction most people wouldn't guess. It has the highest number of psychologists per capita in the world, with 222 therapists per 100,000 inhabitants. Going to therapy is very normalized in the country. Armenia. Kids are supposed to learn reading, writing, and chess? That's the case in Armenia, at least. Since the 2011-2012 school year, chess has become a mandatory subject in public schools. As you might imagine, Armenia has an impressive chess history, with the Tigran Petrosian Chess House in Yerevan hosting many international tournaments and over 24 active Armenian grandmasters. Australia. One of the strangest wars in the world was fought in Australia, a war against birds, specifically the Emu War of 1932. Emus are huge, standing at the human height of 5.7 feet or 1.7 meters, and by the early 20th century, their population was growing, damaging crops across Australia. So the military stepped in. They targeted emus with machine guns, but realized it took up to 10 bullets to kill a single bird. This dampened enthusiasm for the war, and it ended pretty quickly. One soldier even said, "The emus have proved that they're not so stupid as they're usually considered to be." Austria. The cultured home of Viennese coffee culture, classical music, opera houses, and energy drinks? Though you might not associate Red Bull and its sponsorship of Daredevil stunts with the setting for The Sound of Music, it's true. Red Bull was launched in Austria on April 1st, 1987, and to this day, the international headquarters are in Fushul am See. Azerbaijan.
In Azerbaijan, you'll find a city fully built on stilts. 60 miles or 97 kilometers off the coast of the country's capital, Baku, lies Neft Daslari. It was originally built as a collection of oil wells on the Caspian Sea. Over time, the wells were connected by bridges, then worker housing was built, then shops, medical facilities, a bakery, and a theater, all on stilts, all in the middle of the sea. The Bahamas. Most countries put famous leaders on their currency, but the Bahamas does things a little differently. If you look at the back of the $1 note, you'll see a marching band. It's the band of the Royal Bahamas Police Force, and it's, unsurprisingly, the only marching band to be featured on money anywhere. It's meant to represent the importance of music in Bahamian culture. Bahrain. The largest underwater park in the world is in the Middle Eastern country of Bahrain, fittingly known as Dive Bahrain. It spreads over 25 acres or 101,000 square meters of ocean floor and includes both natural and artificial attractions, like the Bahrain Pearl Bank Artificial Reef. It's an incredible spot for divers from around the world. Bangladesh. Some countries have 4 seasons, while others just experience a dry or wet season. But Bangladesh has them all at once. It experiences 6 separate seasons. Winter is from December to February, spring is February to March, summer is March to May, monsoon season is June to September, autumn is October to November, and cool is November to January. Barbados. Most people know that rum came from the Caribbean, but fewer know that it was first produced in Barbados. Europeans tried to cultivate cotton and tobacco here first, which didn't go so well due to the tropical weather. Then they realized sugarcane was a much better option. The first rum made from sugarcane was known as Kill Devil and was just meant for locals to get drunk on. But eventually, the alcohol was refined to the point where it gave birth to a booming rum industry. Belarus. There's much more to Belarus than its current and forever government. For starters, Belarus is known as the lungs of Europe. 40% of the country is covered in forests, and in addition, mires and marshes in Belarus remove 900,000 tons, or 816 million kilograms of carbon dioxide annually from the atmosphere, and release 630,000 tons, or 571 million kilograms, of oxygen instead. Belarus single-handedly battling climate change. Belgium. Depending on how nerdy you are, Belgium is known as either the headquarters of the EU or a great country for beer drinkers. But this small European country has an outsized influence on another area, comic books. The internationally famous Smurfs were created by Belgian artist Peyo. Popular European series include Lucky Luke, Tintin, and Asterix were also created by Belgians. Belize. Belize's tallest structure was built over 1,000 years ago, but you won't find any skyscrapers here. The biggest man-made building is a Mayan palace called Cana in the archaeological site of Caracol, reaching 141 feet or 43 meters in height. Benin. Though voodoo is most commonly associated with Haiti or New Orleans, it first became popular in Benin, or the Kingdom of Dahomey as it was then called, as Vodun. However, it started over 6,000 years before that in the area. Though many people in Benin are Christian today, voodoo practices are still common in the country. Bhutan. High up in the Himalayas lies the Kingdom of Bhutan, best known for being the only country to use a Gross National Happiness (GNH) index. In addition to trying to improve finances and living conditions for their population, the government of Bhutan uses this measurement to improve happiness and well-being. Plurinational State of Bolivia. Bolivia is home to the most dangerous road in the world, appropriately nicknamed Death Road. Its real name is Yungas Road, and it connects La Paz to the Amazon. In the past, 200 to 300 people died on it every year. Alternative routes exist now, but thrill seekers still travel Yungas Road to experience driving on a less than 10-foot or 3-meter wide road beside cliff drops of over 2,000 feet or 610 meters, in an area prone to landslides and fog. Most of them make it back. Bosnia and Herzegovina. Elections are annoying enough when you're voting for one leader, but can you imagine having to vote for 3? Enter Bosnia and Herzegovina. The country is divided between the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Republika Srpska, established after a civil war in 1992 to 1995. The accords that ended the conflict stated that the federation will elect one Croat and one Bosniak president, while Republika Srpska will elect a Serb president. All three will rule at the same time and rotate chairmanship every 8 months during their 4-year term. Botswana. Botswana is home to the Okavango Delta, the largest inland delta in the world and home to an incredible array of wildlife, including the African elephant. In fact, Botswana is home to about 130,000 African elephants, making it the country with the most elephants in the world. Brazil. Strangely, for a country with one of the biggest populations on Earth, Brazil also has the most uncontacted tribes of any country. FUNAI, the Brazilian Department for Indigenous Affairs, estimates over 100 uncontacted tribes live deep in the Amazon rainforest. Though many tribes had contact in the past, that often resulted in them getting murdered or enslaved by loggers or the rubber industry. A justified reason for staying no contact with Brazilian society today. Brunei. In the capital of Brunei, Bandar Seri Begawan, you'll find the largest palace in the world, the Sultan's home. It's called Istana Nurul Iman and has a total space of 2.15 million square feet, or over 200,000 square meters. With nearly 1,800 rooms, it includes a mosque for 1,500 people, a garage for 110 cars, 5 swimming pools, 257 bathrooms, and a banquet hall that can seat 5,000. Bulgaria. The oldest gold treasure in the world was found outside the Bulgarian city of Varna in 1972. The uncovered necropolis of Varna has 294 graves, with over 3,000 gold artifacts dating from between 4600 and 4200 BC. They're regarded as the first gold objects created by humans. Burkina Faso. Between the 16th and 19th centuries, one of the most fascinating civilizations in Africa ruled in Burkina Faso, the Mossi Kingdoms. They were famous for resisting Arabs and European slave raids and refusing to participate in the trade of enslaved people all the way up to French infiltration into their kingdom and colonization in the 1800s. Burundi. Beer is a popular beverage throughout the world, but Burundi puts its own twist on it. They make it from bananas. The beer is made from banana juice, sugar, honey, and citric acid. While it may sound delicious, it's caused a bit of a problem, as banana beer is 3 times less expensive than other beers. It only costs 30 cents for 1.7 fluid ounces or 50 milliliters and has 40% ABV, more like vodka than beer. This has caused problems from overdrinking to increased levels of diabetes in Burundi. Cambodia. People in Cambodia celebrate New Year's for 3 straight days in the middle of April. The celebration is called, and this is my best shot at it, Hol Khanam Tamaye in the local Khmer language, and takes place at the end of harvest season. It allows everyone, but especially farmers, a much-deserved break, as it's a 3-day public holiday. Cameroon. This sub-Saharan nation is nicknamed Africa in miniature because Cameroon covers all 5 climate zones within its borders, from deserts in the north to rainforests in the south, and savanna, coastal, and mountain zones in between. There are also over 270 spoken languages in the country. Canada. The massive country of Canada is home to pristine lakes, jaw-dropping mountain ranges, beautiful forests, and the polar bear capital of the world. Way up in Manitoba is the city of Churchill, through which about 1,000 polar bears migrate between July and November. Take a train or plane to Churchill. There are no paved roads going to the town, and see if you can spot one, though preferably from a distance. Cabo Verde. Cabo Verde is the country most recently inhabited by humans. No one set foot there until 1456, when the Portuguese landed on the archipelago off the coast of West Africa. This made it the first European overseas colony, founding Cidade da Ribeira Grande in 1461. Today, the population has a mix of European and African ancestry. Central African Republic. Often called the CAR, the Central African Republic is home to several pygmy groups, most prominently the Aka. The average adult height only reaches up to 4 foot 11 inches, or 1.5 meters. The scientists believe the short stature of the pygmy groups is an evolutionary trait that suits them to their forest environment, and a byproduct of their early reproductive maturity. Chad. Chad has the unfortunate distinction of being the country with the lowest average lifespan in the world. The average adult in Chad lives to 53 years old, compared to the international average of 72 years old. A combination of poverty, hunger, a high disease burden of malaria, diarrheal diseases, and severe respiratory infections combined with poor medical care caused this low lifespan. Chile. The Atacama Desert is the driest non-polar desert on Earth, and it makes Chile the astronomical capital of the world. Astronomers from around the world head to San Pedro de Atacama to enjoy over 300 clear nights a year, away from light pollution, with some of the largest telescopes on the planet. Their names? Very Large Telescope and Extremely Large Telescope. Seriously. China. You might be surprised to learn that a massive country like China only has one time zone. Even though it should span about 5, every place in China is aligned to Beijing time in the east, GMT plus 8. That makes life in the West confusing, as sunrise may not occur till after 10 a.m., and businesses keep strange operating hours. To further confuse visitors, many people in Western China refer to both local time and Beijing time. Good luck figuring that out. Colombia. Kids in Colombia better be able to handle their coffee, because many of them are going to be drinking it from elementary school onwards. While most parents in the West would faint at the idea of giving their kids more energy, a fair amount of Colombian parents give their kids café con leche, a sweet coffee with lots of milk. Comoros. This archipelago in the Indian Ocean is known as the Perfume Isles because of its very aromatic plant life. For one, it produces 80% of the world's ylang-ylang flowers, the smell of which you may recognize as the basis of Chanel's famous No. 5 perfume. Costa Rica. Known for its lush rainforests and beautiful beaches, Costa Rica is also one of the most eco-friendly countries in the world. It now generates 99% of its electricity from renewable sources, including hydroelectric power and geothermal. Costa Rica is also the first tropical nation to reverse deforestation, from 40% coverage in 1987 to 57% today. Côte d'Ivoire. Côte d'Ivoire is the biggest producer and exporter of cocoa, the basis of chocolate. Its peak year of production, 2021, saw 2.25 million tons, or over 2 billion kilograms of cocoa produced in the country. Unfortunately, it's also one of the leading causes of deforestation in the country, with 90% of the loss of tropical rainforests in the last decades due to converting rainforests to cocoa plantations. Croatia. Smiljan, Croatia is the birthplace of Serbian-American Nikola Tesla, internet darling and one of the world's greatest inventors. Though Thomas Edison is often credited with inventing the modern application of electricity, Tesla was actually the one that developed the AC power system, in addition to 100 other US patents. Cuba. Perhaps necessary for a country known for rum and cigars, Cuba has the highest doctor-to-patient ratio in the world, ahead of Monaco, Sweden, and Belgium. The country has 9 doctors for every 1,000 citizens, a result of Fidel Castro's extensive investment in healthcare to make it free and universal. In comparison, the US has 2.6 doctors per 1,000 people. Cyprus. Cyprus is perhaps best known for its complex politics, but here's another fun fact you might not be aware of. The island nation has more cats than people. It's estimated that Cyprus has 1.5 million cats, many of them stray, with a human population of just 1.2 million people. The Czech Republic, or Czechia. If you think you like beer, you have nothing on the average Czech person. The Czech Republic consumed a record of 48.6 gallons or 184 liters of beer per capita in 2021, with amounts ranging from 32 to 42 gallons per person in other years. Compare that to Germany, the home of Oktoberfest, where the average German drank 23 gallons or 88 liters per capita in 2023. Democratic Republic of the Congo. It literally takes months to drive across the DRC. While it is a big country, the long driving time is mostly due to the impossible road conditions, especially once you leave major Congolese cities. Though there are over 36,200 miles or over 58,000 kilometers of national roads, only 5% of the roads are paved. Decades of civil conflict have also destroyed parts of the minimal paved roads. Denmark. Ever wonder why there's a massive Legoland in Denmark? Well, it's because Lego started here in 1934. Ole Kirk Christensen was hammering away at this workshop in Billund when, one day in 1932, he decided to start making wooden toys. The toys took off, and in 1934, he created the Lego Company. Parents' feet have not known a moment of peace since. Djibouti. Djibouti is one of the saltiest countries on Earth, and that's not a metaphor. It's home to Lake Assal, located at 509 feet or 155 meters below sea level and 10 times saltier than the sea. Djibouti is also home to Lac Abe, a massive salt lake that contains a plateau with hundreds of towering limestone chimneys. Dominica. This tiny Caribbean island nation of 66,500 people is the only country in the world that sperm whales choose as a year-round home. There are over 200 sperm whales off the island's shores, making whale watching a very popular activity for locals and tourists here. Dominican Republic. The Dominican Republic's flag has something unique on it: a Bible. It's the only country in the world to feature it, along with a cross and the flag itself on the flag's central coat of arms. Christianity clearly played an important part in the country's founding and history, as the motto is Dios, Patria, Libertad, or God, Fatherland, and Liberty. Ecuador. Perhaps it's no surprise that Ecuador, home of the famous Galapagos Islands, was the first country in the world to recognize that nature has rights. In 2008, the country declared that nature has, quote, the right to exist, persist, maintain, and regenerate its vital cycles, rather than viewing it strictly as property. Egypt. Ancient Egypt may be one of the most well-known and studied civilizations on the planet, but you also owe much of your personal hygiene to this historic civilization. Deodorant, the toothbrush, and toothpaste were all invented in ancient Egypt, much to the relief of modern-day people on public transportation everywhere. El Salvador. In 2021, El Salvador became the first country to declare Bitcoin an official currency. This means that it can theoretically be used as legal tender everywhere, in addition to the existing currency of the US dollar. However, this hasn't always translated in practice, as not every store is set up for Bitcoin transactions. You should still have dollars when you visit. Equatorial Guinea. Less of a fun fact and more of a depressing reality, Equatorial Guinea has been ruled by President Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo since 1979, making him the longest-serving ruler in the world outside of monarchs. In 2024, he won re-election with 94.9% of the vote for a sixth term, after security forces had arrested opposition leaders. Eritrea. Eritrea has a long history of women going into battle alongside men. The first records of women in combat date back to the 7th century BC. During the resistance to Italian colonization and Ethiopian occupation, women were an important part of the war effort. 30% of the fighters during the Eritrean War of Independence were women. Estonia. Bookworms should look into Estonian citizenship, as the country leads the world in most books per capita. The average Estonian has 218 books to their name, and 35% of the country owns at least 350 books. 13% of people there have over 500 books. Eswatini. The longest-serving monarch in history is not Queen Elizabeth II, but rather King Sobhuza II of Eswatini. He ruled from 1899 to 1982, a total of 82 years and 254 days. Though he didn't officially ascend the throne until he was 22 in 1921, his father died when he was a baby, making him king with his grandmother serving as regent until he could be toilet trained, learn to speak, and finish college. Ethiopia. Ethiopia has a completely different concept of time than most other countries. They have 13 months, with 12 months of 30 days each and an extra 5 or 6 days called Pugume, designated as a 13th month, and lag a little in terms of year. So, if you want to return to the year 2000, go to Ethiopia. They also start their clocks at dawn, so they use a 12-hour clock starting at what the rest of the world considers 6 a.m. and ending at 6 p.m. Fiji. Most people recommend wearing hats in sunny locations, but you may want to avoid doing so in Fiji. When you visit villages, wearing a hat can be a sign of disrespect. Traditionally, only the village chiefs are allowed to wear hats, so your backwards Yankees cap is actually offending people here, for many reasons. Finland. Finland is rising. We don't mean metaphorically. The actual land of Finland is rising. It's because of the slowest rebound of all time, 0.3 to 0.35 inches or 8 to 9 millimeters a year, or as fast as fingernails grow, after a 1,000-year-old glacier retreat across the land. But that still adds around 200 football fields of land to Finland every year. France. France is serious about cracking down on food waste. And who would want to throw out French food anyway? In 2016, the country passed a law making grocery stores donate still edible food to NGOs and charities instead of throwing it away, formalizing a process of prevention, recovery, and recycling. Gabon. The capital of Gabon was founded by freed slaves in 1848. The French Navy captured a Brazilian ship, Leticia, carrying enslaved people near Angola and freed them in Gabon. They then established Libreville, Freetown on the coast. It became the administrative capital of the area under French colonial rule and the largest city in Gabon post-independence. The Gambia. In Gambia, there is a surefire cure for fertility problems. Just bathe in the waters of Kachikali. One catch, the full name is the Kachikali Sacred Crocodile Pond. Women come in groups, bathe one at a time in an open concrete hut, and upon leaving are urged not to cheat on their spouses. If they do all of the above, they're supposed to conceive within the year. Georgia. People may associate fine wines with California, France, and Italy, but the first evidence of wine production was discovered 20 miles south of Tbilisi in Georgia, dating back to 6000 BC. The wine was stored in vessels called kuvevri. Some archaeologists think it was first created by accident, when wild yeast fermented the grapes that Georgians were storing underground for the winter. Germany. Germany has the distinction of being the only country in the world with no speed limit at all on some roads, mainly sections of the Autobahn. Though you may see an 80-mile-an-hour or 130-kilometer-an-hour sign, sometimes that's more of a guideline than an actual rule. However, be careful, because some sections of the Autobahn still have a max speed limit, especially the parts close to cities. Ghana. Dead people are sent off in style in Ghana, in fantasy coffins. Known as Abebu Adekai in Ghana, which translates to proverb boxes, they are colorful and intricately designed, meant to capture some part of the deceased's personality or essence. The carpenters who make them are highly skilled. Whether you want to be buried in a shoe, a cocoa pod, or a fish, they can fix it up. Greece. The world's oldest known computer wasn't made in Silicon Valley. It was created in Greece. The Antikythera mechanism, found in a shipwreck off the Greek coast, is a 2,000-year-old machine with multiple gears, widely regarded as the world's first computer. It was used to predict celestial movements. Grenada. If you like to cook with spices, you can thank Grenada for that. It's known as the Island of Spice, thanks to its impressive spice production of nutmeg, cinnamon, ginger, cloves, allspice, bay leaves, and turmeric. Nutmeg is so important, in fact, that not only does Grenada produce 20% of the world's entire crop, but the spice is even on the national flag. Guatemala. Guatemalans have a very interesting form of public transportation: old American school buses, known as chicken buses. School buses that are at least 10 years old and or have more than 150,000 miles or 240,000 kilometers on them are auctioned off, some driven down to Guatemala. Then they're refurbished with a lot of colorful bells and whistles and put in circulation connecting different cities and provinces. More Guatemalans ride chicken buses than own a car. Guinea. Guinea is known as a geological miracle because of its rich variety of mineral resources. It has huge bauxite reserves, 2/3 of all international reserves. It also has vast reserves of iron, gold, copper, diamonds, nickel, and cobalt. Despite that, Guinea remains one of the poorest countries in the world, with a GDP per capita of around $1,500 in 2023. Guinea-Bissau. In Guinea-Bissau, just off the coast, is a network of around 90 islands called the Bisagos, run almost entirely by women. In these matriarchal societies, women are not only political, financial, and spiritual leaders, but also homeowners. The women here choose their husbands, and are even the ones to propose. Guyana. Guyana is known as the land of the giants. Its lush rainforests and lively rivers are home to thousands of species of flora and fauna, many of them incredibly large land and sea creatures. That includes the jaguars, arapaima, freshwater fish, capybaras, giant anteaters, and the world's largest lily, Victoria amazonica. Haiti. The world's only successful slave revolt took place in Haiti between 1791 and 1804. Led by Toussaint Louverture, enslaved people in Haiti rose up against colonists, British and French armies, and eventually won their independence from France. Thus, Haiti also became the first country founded by former enslaved people. Honduras. Everyone knows most Latin American countries are obsessed with soccer, but did you know that Honduras is so obsessed it fought a war over it? In 1969, El Salvador knocked Honduras out of the running for the 1970 World Cup. 3 weeks later, a 4-day war called the Football War started. Thousands of people would die on each side. Though there were underlying issues, economic, immigration, and land disputes, that final soccer match pushed things over the edge. Hungary. Even Hungarians will tell you their language is quite difficult to learn. The fact that their alphabet has 44 letters, unlike the 26 found in the Latin alphabet, may make things even more complicated. It includes several different types of O's and U's, with different diacritics meant to enrage students around the world. Iceland. Iceland is a magical place, but to the locals, it's actually a magical place, as in 54% of them believe in elves, or as they call them, Huldufolk, or hidden people. Strangely, this belief has protected Iceland's natural wonders more than any magical creatures could. Since the 1930s, activists have blocked construction projects to stop them from destroying elvish habitats. India. Famous gatherings like Carnaval in Rio de Janeiro may make headlines, but it's actually not the biggest gathering in the world. Perhaps Mecca? Nope. The largest gathering in the world is the Maha Kumbh Mela Festival, held every 12 years in one of 4 places. About 400 million Hindu pilgrims make their way to the 45-day festival. In comparison, Mecca sees about 2 million pilgrims a year. Indonesia. If you like to avoid lava, Indonesia may not be the place for you. It's the volcano capital of the world, with 130 active volcanoes thanks to its location on the Pacific Ring of Fire. The most active by far is Mount Merapi, which has erupted over 30 times in the past 1,000 years. The Islamic Republic of Iran. It's currently, let me check my watch here, the year 1403 in Iran. No, they're not stuck in a time warp, they just use the Iranian calendar. It's called the Solar Hijri calendar, and it revolves around the solar year. So the first 3 months are in spring, and the last 3 are in winter. The reason it's still in 1403 is because it starts from Muhammad's hijra, his migration from Mecca. Iraq. If you paid attention in high school, you might remember that Iraq is home to the oldest writing system in the world, known as cuneiform. It makes sense since the country is also home to the oldest civilization, Mesopotamia. Sumerian scribes developed the writing system in 3200 BC and inscribed it on clay tablets. Ireland. Many people think Halloween got its start in Central America with the Dia de los Muertos celebration. However, Halloween actually got its start in Ireland. The Gaelic festival Samhain, a New Year's celebration, was celebrated from the night of October 31st to November 1st, starting over 2,000 years ago. People wore costumes for it, believing it would protect them against evil spirits. Israel. Israel is the country with the most museums per capita in the world, partly due to the ancient civilizations that thrived there. It's also partly due to its importance as a religious center for multiple major world religions. The most famous may be the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, a huge museum prominently featuring the Dead Sea Scrolls. Italy. There are over 1,200 UNESCO World Heritage Sites internationally, and Italy has 60 of them as of 2024, making it the country with, by far, the most. The most recently added was the 497-mile or 800-kilometer-long Via Appia, a historically important road first built by the ancient Romans. Jamaica. Jamaica may have a laid-back reputation, but it's also the fastest country in the world. This small Caribbean nation of 2.8 million people absolutely dominates in short-distance running, producing some of the fastest runners. This includes Usain Bolt, as well as the female running trio of Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce, Shericka Jackson, and Elaine Thompson-Herah, who have won 19 medals between them. Japan. Japan is both high-tech and incredibly old. In fact, the oldest company in the world is found there, headquartered in Osaka. Japanese construction company Kongo Gumi has been in operation building and maintaining Buddhist temples since 578 AD. It had been working for over 1,400 straight years until it became part of another company in 2006. Jordan. The lowest point on Earth, the Dead Sea, is found in Jordan. This inland sea is 1,378 feet, or about 420 meters below sea level. Tourists flock here to float in the incredibly salty, 30% saline content waters, and bathe in both water and mud from the sea for its healing properties. Just avoid swimming there with any open cuts. Kazakhstan. No, Kazakhstan is not the home of Borat, because he's fictional, but it is home of the Baikonur Cosmodrome. It's the largest operational space launch facility in the world. It's also the first space launch facility, built in 1955, used for notable Soviet missions like Yuri Gagarin's launch into space in 1961, which made him the first human to orbit Earth. Kenya. Kenya is home to the Kalenjin people, nicknamed the Running Tribe, which produces a disproportionate amount of marathon runners. The 11 Kalenjin tribes make up less than 0.1% of the global population, but have collectively won 50 Olympic gold medals in running and 40% of all international running championships since 1980. It may be because the Kalenjin run to school every day in high altitudes. Kiribati. And yes, that is how it's pronounced. If you ever wonder where the day starts, the answer is Kiribati. Since it's just west of the international dateline, Kiribati is the first country to experience each new day. Thanks to its position by the dateline and the equator, it's also the only contiguous country in the world to reside in all 4 hemispheres. Kuwait. Kuwait has the highest value currency in the world, the Kuwaiti dinar. Each dinar is worth $3.25. The currency is strong because Kuwait is an oil-rich country that's also the 4th richest country in the world per capita, with sound financial policies, no debt, and a budget surplus. Kyrgyzstan. This Central Asian country is famous for kumis, a fermented horse milk. Kyrgyz people have traditionally drunk it for centuries for its health benefits and medicinal properties. It has an alcohol content of between 0.7% to 2.5%, less than half of an average beer, so you likely won't get drunk off of it. But many report that the taste is unpleasant. Laos. Laos is a stunning country with magnificent temples and beautiful landscapes. However, it's also the most bombed country in the world. Unfortunately for Laos, it was right next to Vietnam during the Vietnam War, leading to over 2 million tons or 1.8 billion kilograms of bombs dropped on Laos between 1964 and 1973, more than all the bombs dropped on Europe during World War II. Latvia. The world's first decorated Christmas tree was displayed in Riga, Latvia. Though Christmas trees were present in Germany before that, the decoration of trees started in 1510, when a local Latvian merchants guild put artificial flowers on a tree in the marketplace. They then danced around it, and then, in a part of the tradition unfortunately lost to time, set the tree on fire. Lebanon. Lebanese culture was always recognized for its hospitality, and nowhere is this more evident than in the fact that it hosts the most refugees per capita in the world. The majority of them these days are Syrian refugees, but Palestinian and other refugees also now call Lebanon home. At last estimate, 25% of the Lebanese population, around 1.5 million people, are refugees. Lesotho. Known as the Kingdom in the Sky, Lesotho is the only country to wholly sit above 3,200 feet or 975 meters in elevation. Maybe that's why Business Insider described the dizzying takeoff from the country's cliffside airport as, quote, when a bird is pushed out of the nest in order to learn to fly, which might also explain the relatively low amount of tourism in Lesotho. Liberia. The American Colonization Society founded Liberia in 1821 as a home for formerly enslaved people, leading 12,000 black people released from slavery in the U.S. to settle there by 1861. The country gained independence in 1847 and elected an African-American president. Libya. Libya is a little bit oil and a whole lot of desert. In fact, over 90% of the country is part of the Sahara Desert. That means there are parts of Libya that have not experienced rain in over 25 years. If you're gonna visit, remember to hydrate. Liechtenstein. Once a year on August 15th, known as National Day, Liechtenstein's ruler, His Serene Highness Prince Hans Adam II, invites people to grab a drink with him at his garden party in Vaduz Castle and celebrate. And by people, we mean all of Liechtenstein. Considering the country only has just over 39,800 residents, we're sure the castle gardens can accommodate them. Lithuania. There's something intriguing inside Lithuania, another country. The tiny republic of Užupis is just 0.4 square miles or a single square kilometer in size, but still has a president, government, constitution, currency, and a couple of boats for a navy. It started as an April Fool's joke on April 1st, 1997, when a group of Vilnius creatives declared their neighborhood independent. But then they formalized the joke, and Užupis is now a source of pride for Lithuania. The constitution includes the lines, "Everyone has the right to die, but this is not an obligation," and "Everyone has the right to understand nothing." Luxembourg. Luxembourg was the first country in the world to offer free public transportation for everyone in the country, and it's still only one of a handful that does so. Need to take a tram, train, or bus? Entirely free. The fact that Luxembourg has one of the highest GDP per capita in the world probably helps in providing this service. Madagascar. The island of Madagascar broke off from the rest of Africa around 165 million years ago, meaning its flora and fauna evolved completely differently than their neighbors on the mainland. So, of the 250,000 species found on the island, a full 70% are found nowhere else in the world. Malawi. Malawi has a fish version of the Galapagos Islands. Lake Malawi, the fourth largest lake by volume in the world, it covers 20% of the country, has hundreds of endemic freshwater fish species that are found nowhere else in the world. Most famous are the multicolored cichlids. Malaysia. In Borneo, Malaysia, you will find the largest flower in the world, known as Rafflesia. But don't try sending one to your partner. Not only can it grow to over 3 feet, nearly a meter across, and 24 pounds or 11 kilograms, it's also known as the corpse flower because it emits a smell similar to rotting meat when it finally blooms, so flies can feast on it. Not the most romantic bouquet to give someone. The Maldives. The Maldives is the lowest country in the world, reaching only 8 feet or 2.5 meters above sea level at its highest point. While this is great news for tourists who hate walking up inclines, it's not great news for locals dealing with rising sea levels. In 2009, President Mohamed Nasheed actually held an underwater cabinet meeting to call attention to the urgent sea level crisis in the country. And if the issue isn't addressed, that will be all future cabinet meetings. Mali. Move aside, Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. The richest man who ever lived was Mansa Musa, former resident of Mali. Mansa Musa ruled the Mali Empire between 1280 and 1337 as the king of Timbuktu. The area had massive salt and gold deposits. Mali once held half the world's gold supply, making Mansa Musa the wealthiest man alive, with a fortune of $400 billion. But Mansa Musa was renowned for his generosity. He gave away so much gold on his pilgrimage to Mecca, it may have actually altered Egypt's economy. Malta. An ancient society thrived on Malta for 1,500 years, and then 4,000 years ago, they disappeared. Today, you can see some of the megalithic temples they left behind, like Gantia, Hajar-Im, and the Hippogeum of Halsaflini. Archaeologists believe that a combination of droughts, Malta has no permanent rivers, and a big climate event like a nearby volcanic eruption ended human settlement in Malta altogether. Well, for a while at least. Marshall Islands. The fun-sounding Bikini Atoll hides a dark history. The US used Bikini, as well as the atolls of Rongelap, Utrecht, and Inuiatak in the Marshall Islands, as nuclear testing grounds between 1946 and 1958. They detonated the equivalent of 7,000 Hiroshima bombs during this period. US Navy officials did ask people to leave for the good of mankind and to end all wars, but the Marshallese were still close enough to experience fallout. Rates of cancer, miscarriages, and stillbirths skyrocketed in the local population after these tests. Mauritania. Mauritania has one of the longest and heaviest trains in the world, and it has become a strange, rather niche tourist attraction. The 1.8-mile or 3-kilometer long train has 200 to 300 carriages and travels 437 miles or about 700 kilometers from the mining town of Zouarat to Nouadhibou port and back. And now, in addition to iron ore, tourists are on it. Don't imagine some lavish Orient Express-like tour. You either ride in a rusted passenger wagon, or as many people do, in the carriages carrying or waiting to carry the iron ore itself. Mauritius. One of the most famous extinct species of all time, the dodo bird, called Mauritius home. The dodo bird developed to be large, flightless, and relatively defenseless against predators because there weren't really any around. However, when sailors started settling Mauritius, they killed it for its meat. In just a century, by 1662 to 1681, the bird was completely extinct. However, Mauritius still honors it by nicknaming their football team after this slow, defenseless bird. We imagine opposing teams aren't too scared to play the Mauritius dodos. Micronesia. The Micronesian island of Yap has a unique form of currency, massive stones named Rai. Though islanders use the US dollar, big purchases from well-off families like land or dowry payments are often made with huge stone discs. These discs never change hands. They're set up all over the island, including in stone money banks. And when a transaction happens, word spreads that they now belong to someone else. Weirdest of all, they were quarried 300 miles away in Palau and carried back on a canoe. Moldova. The relatively poor Eastern European country of Moldova has, surprisingly, the largest collection of wine in the world. The underground tunnels of Melești Mici hold 2 million bottles. Moldova has a historic winemaking tradition dating back 5,000 years, and you'll find multiple collections throughout the country. Monaco. Though Monaco is best known for its world-famous casino, gambling is actually banned for the citizens of Monaco. It's one thing to extract money from tourists, it's another to create a nation of gambling addicts. Most locals don't mind though, because living in Monaco, they get to pay no income or property tax. Perhaps that's why a third of the population is made up of millionaires. Mongolia. Mongolia has the highest percentage of nomadic people of any country in the world. Around 40% of the population is nomadic, compared to 3% of the total global population. They live in yurts in the Mongolian country, particularly in the steppes, and quickly deconstruct and construct them elsewhere when they need to move. Montenegro. Another eco-friendly country on our list. Montenegro was the first country to declare itself an ecological state in 1991 by passing a declaration and amending its constitution in 1992. The country now includes environmental protection as a vital aspect of its constitution and has pledged to prioritize the preservation and sustainability of its ecosystems. Morocco. Fez is home to the oldest university in the world as recognized by Guinness World Records. Al-Qarawiyyin, an Arab woman named Fatima al-Fihri, established it all the way back in 859 AD, and it flourished during the Islamic Golden Age. Morocco incorporated it into its state university system in 1963, just a millennium and change after its founding. Mozambique. Mozambique has the only flag with a modern weapon on it, an AK-47 to be specific. A handful of other countries have muskets, swords, or spears, but Mozambique has a pretty high-powered gun along with a book and a hoe. They symbolize defense, education, and agriculture respectively. Myanmar. Women and children, and sometimes men, have a very special makeup and skincare routine in Myanmar called thanaka. They apply dried-out bark and roots of the thanaka tree made into a paste on their face for both cosmetic and health reasons. It's supposed to protect the skin from sunlight, improve acne, and just make skin healthier overall. You'll see it as a light yellow paste on people's cheeks, forehead, and/or their nose. Namibia. One of the coolest sights in Namibia is a specific stretch where the desert meets the sea, known as the Skeleton Coast. Hazardous conditions off the coast here, including thick fog, strong winds, and heavy swells, have led to an unbelievable amount of shipwrecks. Over 1,000 rusted ships can be spotted on the desert along the coast, dragged in by sand over time. Nauru. For a brief period in the 1970s and part of the 80s, Nauru was the richest country in the world thanks to its huge phosphate reserves. However, the reserves were ruthlessly strip-mined for years and eventually exhausted. This led income and the general quality of life on the island to drastically plummet. Nepal. Nepal holds an interesting distinction. It's the country with the highest number of public holidays in the world, 39 to be exact. Because both Buddhists and Hindus live in Nepal, multiple religious holidays and festivals are celebrated. However, don't pack your bags just yet. The country also has a 6-day work week, so the extra time off sort of evens out. The Netherlands. Losing money in the stock market? Direct your complaints to the Netherlands. It turns out the first people to come up with the concept of shares and stocks in general were the Dutch. When the Dutch East India Company was founded in 1602, they had the idea to finance their fleet by issuing bonds in the form of company stock. New Zealand. In addition to being the filming location of the Lord of the Rings movies, New Zealand has a lot more to be proud of. It was the first country in the world to give all women the right to vote, way back in 1893. US women wouldn't get universal suffrage until 1920. Nicaragua. There are almost no operating newspapers left in Nicaragua. Independent outlets have been chased out by the dictatorial government. Journalists and editors are often detained. In 2021, police stormed the offices of La Prensa after a century of operation. Though the newspaper only operates digitally from other countries now, its print edition back then printed one great last headline: "The dictatorship can't hide the truth." Niger. Niger has the youngest population in the world, with a median age of 15 years. That means half the population is under 15, and the other half is over 15. Not coincidentally, it also has the highest fertility rate in the world, with an average of 6.6 births per woman in 2024. Nigeria. Right behind Bollywood, the Nigerian film industry, appropriately named Nollywood, is the second largest film producer in the world. Though it works with smaller budgets than both Hollywood and Bollywood, Nigeria produces around 2,500 films a year. In comparison, Hollywood only puts out 300 to 900 a year. North Korea. There's no end to the weird facts we could list about North Korea, so here's one that covers a lot of ground. North Korea has made any influence from South Korea illegal. A law in 2020 made watching South Korean entertainment punishable by death. Police also check for white wedding dresses, considered South Korean, and even go through citizens' phones for use of possible slang from South Korea. North Macedonia. Skopje, North Macedonia, is the birthplace of Mother Teresa, whose given name was Agnes Gonje Boyajiu. Though the charitable nun was mostly associated with her work in Calcutta, she was born and raised in Skopje until she left to join a convent at 18 years old. Norway. Perhaps unsurprisingly for a country buried in snow half the year and reaching up past the Arctic Circle, Norway has won more medals in the Winter Olympics than any other country in the world. It has 405 compared to the US in second place with 330. It also hosted the Winter Olympics twice, in Oslo in 1952 and in Lillehammer in 1994. The Sultanate of Oman. Oman produces the finest and most expensive frankincense worldwide. Yes, turns out frankincense isn't just something in a biblical story. It's a resin used in incense and perfumes. Oman is full of frankincense trees, and you can buy this resin in markets all over the country. Pakistan. A shocking number of people in Pakistan have their birthday on January 1st, at least on official documentation. Many people in Pakistan don't really celebrate birthdays, though that's changing with Western influence, and so many parents never mark the date of a child's birth or even remember it. So 1/1 is just an easy day to pick to note down a person's birthday. Palau. Palau has a huge marine lake on Ely Malk Island, known as Jellyfish Lake. You can swim in jellyfish-filled waters here without fear of being stung, as the jellyfish evolved away from producing poison since they don't need to defend against predators. However, don't dive too deep, because towards the bottom there are toxic levels of hydrogen sulfide, much deadlier than the impotent jellyfish. Panama. If you can't decide whether you want to see a scenic sunrise or sunset over the ocean, head to Panama, where you can see both from the same spot. At the top of Volcan Baru, the highest point in Panama, you can see the sunrise over the Pacific and set over the Atlantic. That might not sound right, but Panama curves, so from Volcan Baru, the Atlantic is actually to the west. Papua New Guinea. Papua New Guinea is the most linguistically diverse country on Earth. Over 800 languages are spoken throughout the country. That's partly due to the fact that Papua New Guinea's difficult terrain, including tall mountains and dense forests, cut communities off from each other for centuries, leading to the development of hundreds of different languages. Paraguay. The entirely landlocked country of Paraguay has the biggest navy of any landlocked country, with at least 34 vessels. You may be asking, why? Well, the country still has plenty of rivers, and the Navy crosses them to get down to the sea through Argentina. Naval ships are used to detect and combat drug trafficking rings in the area. Peru. Potatoes were first discovered in Peru over 10,000 years ago, growing wild on the shores of Lake Titicaca. Even today, there are over 4,000 potato varieties growing throughout the country, ranging from blue to pink to purple and yellow. The Philippines. Most nurses in the world come from the Philippines. In the US alone, 4% of all nursing staff and 33% of all foreign-born nursing staff is Filipino. This weird fact happens due to a combination of reasons. Filipino people tend to have a high level of proficiency in English. Nursing education is generally affordable, and the Filipino government supports nursing training. However, low wages and long hours means they pursue jobs in other countries. Poland. Two of the most renowned names in science history were Polish. Marie Curie, a pioneer in radioactivity, and Nicholas Copernicus, the astronomer who first said the Earth revolved around the sun, were both Polish. Perhaps their ethnicity is a bit more obvious when you hear their birth names: Maria Salomea Skłodowska and Mikołaj Kopernik. Portugal. The oldest bookstore in the world is Livraria Bertrand, in the Chiado neighborhood of Lisbon. It was established in 1732, then became a chain over the years. There are now 59 branches in the country, but the original branch is still operating almost 3 centuries later. Qatar. The world has been moving from rural to urban areas for some time, but Qatar takes the cake in terms of urbanization. 99.2% of the Qatari population lives in cities. In fact, over 80% of residents live in the capital city of Doha alone. Republic of the Congo. If you notice some very well-dressed men and women in the capital of Brazzaville, you may have come across the country's sapeurs. Known as the Society for the Advancement of People of Elegance, sapeurs have been around since the 1920s and believe in dressing in elegant designer suits and fashionable dapper styles. The movement was originally centered on men, but more women and children have been joining. Romania. The Mary Cemetery in Sapanta, Romania, has a different take on death and mourning than most other places. You won't find traditional dark tombstones with stately inscriptions here. The cemetery is filled with bright, colorful tombstones, some of them bearing paintings, and almost all of them including funny poems depicting scenes from the deceased's life. Russia. To the surprise of almost no one, the coldest town in the world is located in Siberia, in the far east of Russia. Oymyakon has average winter temperatures of -50 Fahrenheit or -45 Celsius, and has hit a record low temperature of -90 degrees Fahrenheit in 1933. That's -68 Celsius. It's so cold that some people leave their cars running almost throughout the entire winter, because restarting the engine in such frigid temperatures is nearly impossible. Rwanda. On the last Saturday of every month, Rwanda celebrates the national holiday of Umuganda, but not by drinking or feasting. Rather, from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m., people stop what they're doing to take part in community work, mostly cleaning up their surroundings. On the one hand, it's made Rwanda the cleanest country in Africa. On the other hand, it's not exactly voluntary. Police will fine you if you're not helping. St. Kitts and Nevis. Nevis tried to secede in 1998. That's right, for just a couple of hundred votes, we could have been showing you a video on 196 countries right now. As the smaller island of the two, Nevis felt they were marginalized by the administration in St. Kitts. In 1998, they held a referendum on secession. 62% of the island's 12,000 population voted to secede, which fell short of the 2/3 they needed for independence. St. Lucia. St. Lucia is the only country to be named after a historic woman, St. Lucy of Syracuse. The first French settlers gave the island that name when they were shipwrecked there on December 13th, the saint's feast day. So now, St. Lucia is named after the patron saint of, let me check my notes, blindness and eye problems. St. Vincent and the Grenadines. An active volcano sits on St. Vincent. La Soufrière, which rises over 4,000 feet or 1,200 meters into the air, has erupted 5 times since the 1700s. The biggest one in 1902 killed 1,600 people. But if you're worried about an eruption interrupting your tropical vacation, don't worry about it. La Soufrière hasn't erupted since, April 2021. Enjoy! Samoa. Samoa recognizes 4 cultural genders: man, woman, fa'afafine, and fa'afatama. The latter two mean, respectively, a man acting in the manner of a woman and a woman acting in the manner of a man. They don't align 100% with Western concepts of gender fluidity, but essentially, they're people who fulfill social and cultural roles of a gender other than the one they were assigned, sometimes dressing as the other gender as well. San Marino. The oldest active written constitution belongs to the country of San Marino. Core documents of the country's constitution were first written in 1600. That's over a century and a half before the US Constitution came into existence. San Marino was also founded with a representative form of government in 301 AD, making San Marino the world's oldest republic. São Tomé and Príncipe. Many countries are overly reliant on one resource, like oil, in their economies. São Tomé and Príncipe has the same problem, as it's almost fully dependent on chocolate. This small African country focuses so much on producing cocoa that it ends up being 95% of its total exports. Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia buys sand from Australia. You might wonder why they would need to, considering 95% of the country is desert. However, Saudi Arabian sand is very fine and round, making it hard to use in construction because it won't bind with anything. That's where the hardier Australian sand comes in. Senegal. On every second month of the Islamic calendar, Senegal experiences its own Hajj, or religious pilgrimage. Around 3 million followers of the Murid Brotherhood, under the Sufi branch of Islam, participate in Le Grand Magal de Touba. They journey to the Senegalese city of Touba to celebrate the teachings of their order's founders, Ahmadou Bamba. Participants arrive from dozens of countries across Europe and North America, in addition to African locations. Serbia. Serbian is a Slavic language, but it uses 2 different alphabets. Schools tend to teach in Cyrillic, and Serbs need to learn it anyway because that's what's used on official documents. But they also write in Latin characters, especially helpful when using the internet. Many signs will feature both alphabets, even though they're spelling the same words. Seychelles. The incredibly weird, wavy, sculpted rock formations of the Seychelles are immediately noticeable. That's because the Seychelles are the only mid-ocean granite islands in the world, formed by magma, something that generally requires continental volcanic activity. That's why the Seychelles were used as one of the first pieces of evidence of continental drift. Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone is a prime example of more money, more problems. Diamonds were discovered there in the 1930s, leading to exploitation by colonial powers. Eventually, blood diamonds were used to fund the Revolutionary United Front, the RUF, during an over-decade-long civil war, all while the nation remained in poverty. However, the situation has improved today, and the government has tried to regulate the production and mining of diamonds to be more ethical. Singapore. Singapore, which is a city and country all at once, is nicknamed Fine City. You may think that's a reflection of how beautiful and clean it is, which it is, but it's actually because of all the behaviors that can result in a fine. These include selling or chewing gum, flying a kite, walking naked inside of your house if you can be seen from outside, and forgetting to flush your toilet. Slovakia. There's only one horologe in the world that shows accurate solar time for the location it's in, rather than an average time. And that's the horologe in Stara Bystrica, Slovakia. This astronomical clock also shows the position and phases of the moon, and the position of the sun in the zodiac. Slovenia. Slovenians love bees. While most of the rest of the country generally tries to avoid them, Slovenians recognize how important bees are for agriculture and the ecosystem at large. Perhaps that's why 1 in 200 Slovenes keeps and/or tends to bees. The Solomon Islands. Only 1 to 2% of the people on Solomon Islands can fluently speak the country's official language of English. Instead, there are over 70 other languages spoken, mainly influenced by English, including the de facto lingua franca of the country, Solomon's Pidgin, and English Creole. Somalia. A huge chunk of southern Somalia, known as Somaliland, declared independence in 1991 and operates mostly autonomously. Though it hasn't been officially internationally recognized, it's much more open to foreigners than Somalia, and overall considered safer and more stable. South Africa. South Africa is the only country in the world with 3 capitals. Pretoria is the executive capital, Bloemfontein is the judicial capital, and Cape Town is the legislative capital. But none of them are the country's biggest city. That would be Johannesburg. The capitals were established in 1910 when the Union of South Africa was formed, to prevent any one region from dominating the others in importance. South Korea. Half of the 51.3 million person population in South Korea has only 3 last names. You might think Hollywood was being lazy by giving Korean characters the last names of Kim, Lee, or Park, but it turns out those are the last names for 50% of all South Korean people. South Sudan. The newest country in the world, South Sudan was established in 2011. It was the result of a long and bloody civil war in Sudan between government forces and the southern rebels represented mostly by the Sudan People's Liberation Army. 98.8% of southern Sudanese voted for independence on July 9, 2011. Unfortunately, violence and civil strife continues to plague both Sudan and South Sudan. Spain. Spain? It's in the wrong time zone. When the dictator Francisco Franco ruled the country in the mid-20th century, he changed Spain's time zone from GMT to GMT+1 in 1940. Why? Well, because he wanted to be closer to his pal, Hitler. While Spain theoretically stayed neutral, Franco collaborated with Nazi Germany and so wanted to be in the same time zone with his friends, Germany and Italy. Sri Lanka. The oldest human-planted tree in the world exists in Sri Lanka. In 288 BC, a tree was planted in Mahamahuna Gardens. It was a sapling of the tree the Buddha sat under to achieve enlightenment. That sapling still exists today, though it has grown into a majestic tree known as the Jayashree Mahabodhi, a Bo tree. Sudan. Sudan has twice as many pyramids as Egypt. Though Egypt's pyramids are more well-known internationally, Sudan has 200 pyramids within its borders, many built along the Nile, mostly constructed by the ancient kingdom of Kush. As in Egypt, they were mostly used as tombs for kings, queens, and wealthy citizens. Suriname. Suriname has the highest percentage of forest cover of any country in the world. 93% of the country is covered in forest, mostly rainforest. The sheer amount of trees actually make it a carbon-negative country, as the trees absorb more greenhouse gases from the atmosphere than Suriname as a whole emits. Sweden. While other countries decorate their subway systems with graffiti and rats, Stockholm's metro system has been called the world's longest art exhibition. The 68-mile, 110-kilometer-long metro system has 100 stations, and 90 of them have been decorated by dozens of artists, each with a different theme. Switzerland. Switzerland has been proclaimed the most innovative country in the world for 14 years in a row as of 2024. The country's strong university industry research collaboration, relatively affordable prestige universities, and government-backed innovation agency, InnoSuisse, make it clear that Switzerland values research development and STEM in general. Syria. One of the oldest civilizations in the world, the Sumerians, lived in Syria thousands of years ago. Perhaps that's why Damascus is widely accepted as the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world, founded in 3000 BC. Though Jericho is an older settlement, it wasn't established as a city until much later. Tajikistan. The high-altitude country of Tajikistan has over 8,000 glaciers, a significant source of drinking water and hydroelectric power. The biggest one is called Fedchenko Glacier. At 48 miles or 77 kilometers long, it's the longest glacier outside of the polar caps. Tanzania. The world's largest caldera and one of the best wildlife spotting destinations on Earth is located in Tanzania. The Ngorongoro crater formed 2.5 million years ago and has an area of 102 square miles or 264 square kilometers today. It's recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site for good reason. Thailand. Most Thai men become monks temporarily. You know how some countries have mandatory military service? Well, many young Thai men enter a Buddhist monastery for a period ranging from a few weeks to a few months, a practice known as temporary ordination. They shave their hair, don orange robes, and spend time learning about Buddhist teachings in order to create merit for their family. Timor-Leste. The waters off Timor-Leste are the most biodiverse in the world. In the 2010s, scientists from Conservation International examined 10 sites around the country's Atauro Island. They found a total of 643 species, many of which were completely unknown prior to that survey. Each individual site had an average of 253 reef fish species. The previous record was 216 species. Togo. Though many people in African countries converted to Islam or Christianity due to Arab and European influence, Togo is a bit of a holdout. Over 1/3 of the population continues to practice indigenous African religions, including ancestral worship and voodoo. Only 29% of the country is Christian and 20% is Muslim. Tonga. According to the World Health Organization, Tonga is the most obese country in the world. Over 71% of adults in its 106,000 total population are classified as obese. Scientists believe Pacific Islanders' genetic predisposition towards weight gain, coupled with rapidly shifting and increasingly processed diets, are behind the health crisis. Trinidad and Tobago. This Caribbean country grows some of the spiciest peppers in the world. The eye-watering Trinidad Moruga Scorpion and Trinidad Scorpion Butch Tea scored over 2 million and 1.4 million on the Scoville scale. That means the Scorpion is about 240 times hotter than a jalapeno. Maybe have a glass of water or milk with you when trying the local cuisine. Tunisia. Tunisia was the home of ancient Carthage, a Phoenician city-state known as one of the richest cities in the classical world with one of the most powerful navies at the time. It flourished until its rivalry with Rome led to the Punic Wars, and Rome destroyed Carthage in 146 BC. Turkey. The first coin in the world was minted in the Anatolian kingdom of Lydia around 600 BC. Though at the time it was connected to the Greeks, the site of the first coin lies in the country of Turkey. They were rougher and less perfectly shaped than the coins we use today, but made of pure gold and silver with a royal symbol on them to prove their authenticity. Turkmenistan. Turkmenistan has been under a very weird dictatorship for a few decades now. This results in many strange laws, but one notable one is the ban on black or dirty cars. In 2018, President Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov decided that to complement his capital, the City of White Marble, he only wanted spotless cars painted either white or silver. Owners of black vehicles had to repaint or give them up, and everyone entering the city runs their car through a car wash first. Tuvalu. In the beginning of the 21st century, Tuvalu had a brilliant business idea. At the dawn of the internet, it was assigned the country code top-level domain .tv. Tuvalu quickly realized it could use this stroke of luck to license its domain to entertainment companies who want to use .tv on their websites. Now, the island nation earns a 1/12 of its national income from this license. Uganda. The Nile River begins in Uganda. Near the town of Jinja, on the north shore of Lake Victoria, the White Nile River starts and then winds its way northwards, eventually joining up with the smaller Blue Nile River, which originates in Ethiopia, all to create the one and only Nile. Ukraine. UNESCO recognizes Ukraine as the country with the most folk songs in the world. 15,500 songs are recognized by UNESCO, while local sources claim up to 200,000 exist. Though you may think you don't know any, Ukrainian melodies have formed the basis for many famous songs. George Gershwin based his own Summertime on the Ukrainian lullaby, "Oh, Sleep Walks by the Windows." United Arab Emirates. Around 88.5% of the population of the United Arab Emirates is made up of expats from over 200 nationalities around the world. The wealthy cities of Dubai and Abu Dhabi in particular have attracted workers and wealth from all over the world. The United Kingdom. You will find the world's longest-running theatrical show in London. Written by famed mystery novelist Dame Agatha Christie, The Mousetrap premiered in the city's famous West End district in 1952 at St. Martin's Theatre. Though it has moved to a different West End venue, it's still running today, making it over 70 years old. So if you haven't gotten tickets yet, you probably still have a lot of time. United States of America. The US remains the only country to have its citizens walk on the moon. The country sent several Apollo missions to the moon between 1969 and 1972, carrying 12 different Americans, the first of which were Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. However, NASA eventually stopped the programs because of the high cost. Uruguay. Uruguay launched a program in 2007 to 2009 called Plan Ceibal. The aim was to give one laptop to every child in the country attending 1st through 6th grades. In what became known as the One Laptop Per Child project, the state provided free laptops and Wi-Fi access to school children to ensure they were connected to the internet. Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan was the heart of the ancient Silk Road. The famous trading route weaved its way from Xi'an, China to destinations in Europe and the Middle East. But the greatest crossroads and bazaars were found in Uzbekistan. 4 out of 7 current UNESCO sites in Uzbekistan, the city of Samarkand, Ichan Kala Fortress, Bukhara, and Shahrazabs, are Silk Road sites. Vanuatu. The people of Vanuatu are adrenaline junkies, because this is where bungee jumping started. First practiced on Pentecost Island in this Pacific nation, it was called land diving, a rite of passage for young boys. Boys between 7 to 10 years old tie vines around their ankles and jump from tall wooden towers. Clearly, there's no helicopter parenting in Vanuatu. Vatican City. Vatican City holds a lot of distinctions. At 0.17 square miles, or just under half a square kilometer, it's by far the smallest country in the world. And for obvious reasons, it's also the only country with a birth rate of 0. Venezuela. Lightning does, in fact, strike in the same place twice. In fact, in one part of Venezuela, lightning hits multiple times almost every single night, or 1.6 million times per year. The phenomenon occurs where cold air from the mountains meets warm air from the Caribbean, over the Catatumbo River flowing into Lake Maracaibo. It's known as Relámpago del Catatumbo, Catatumbo lightning, or the everlasting storm, and takes place around 300 nights a year. Vietnam. Vietnam is home to the largest cave in the world, which was only discovered in 1991. Son Doong Cave is located in Phong Nha Bang National Park and is so big it has its own ecosystem. The cave is 1.36 billion cubic feet, or 38.5 million cubic meters, and 5.5 miles or 9 kilometers long, making it 5 times larger than the previous largest cave record holder. It has its own rainforests, underground river, and even its own weather patterns. Yemen. The oldest skyscraper city in the world isn't New York or Hong Kong, it's Shibam, Yemen. After it was flooded in 1532 to 33, Shibam decided to rebuild in a different way, using vertical urban planning. Over 500 residential towers were built out of mud brick, up to 12 stories and almost 100 feet or 30 meters high. Zambia. Victoria Falls is known as the world's largest waterfall when counting by volume of water, over 5,600 feet or 1,700 meters wide and 354 feet or over 100 meters tall. It's a stunning sight that attracts visitors from all over the world, and it's located right on the border of Zambia and the next and final country on our list, Zimbabwe. In addition to being the other half home of Victoria Falls, Zimbabwe is known for its 8 different currencies. The country was plagued by runaway hyperinflation for years. In an attempt to get it under control, people started using different currencies, including the US dollar, the South African rand, the British pound, the Botswanan pula, the Australian dollar, the Chinese yuan, the Indian rupee, and the Japanese yen.
Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. It really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MatPack. Singapore might seem like a tiny dot on the map of Southeast Asia, but it's a global hub for technology, tourism, and recreation. In fact, it's one of the richest countries in the world. Not bad for an island city-state just off the coast of Malaysia. But it wasn't always this way. Singapore's journey to the top of the global economic stage is nothing short of remarkable. Today, we're diving into the meteoric rise of this microstate and how it transformed from a struggling port to a world-class success story. Singapore might be difficult to find on a map. After all, it's really small. At just 274 square miles, 710 square kilometers, it comes in at number 190 for countries based on area, depending on the source. But in terms of financial power, it's a very different story. Singapore ranks 26th in terms of nominal GDP for the entire world, sandwiched in between regional powerhouses Israel and the United Arab Emirates. And when adjusted for per capita, Singapore rises straight to the top, standing shoulder to shoulder with the world's wealthiest nations. So what's the secret to Singapore's financial powerhouse status? The country is a global destination for business and has been ranked as one of the most industry industry-friendly countries in the world. Known as a mixed market economy, it plays host to countless international corporations and wealth funds and has gotten heavy investment from abroad. This includes a heavy emphasis on refining. The country buys plenty of raw goods and processes them for export abroad. Its electronics manufacturing sector is becoming one of the fastest growing in the world, and as some countries have increasing conflicts with China, that's likely to only benefit it more. It has one of the highest trade to GDP ratios in the world, and the port of Singapore has the second highest rate of cargo tonnage of any port in the world. And that's just the start of what's coming in and out of this bustling nation. Thanks to its wealth, Singapore has one of the most advanced travel and tourism infrastructures in the world. Everyone who comes there usually walks away talking about how smooth everything is, from communications infrastructure to road maintenance to local transit. That's made it a massive destination for business tourism in particular, with many conventions and expos being held there. The main city has also developed a rich cultural and culinary scene, and its proximity to other top tourist destinations in Asia like Shanghai, Seoul, and Tokyo makes it a frequent stopover. Additionally, its excellent medical scene makes it a top spot for medical tourism, particularly for elective surgeries. And it's likely to keep growing, but it was a long way to get here. Today, Singapore's economy is often called a miracle, as it went very quickly from a developing country to a global economic powerhouse during the latter half of the 20th century. And it did this all with very little room to grow. Singapore's small size and little arable land left it little choice but to pivot heavily into industrialization, and it has paid dividends. But looking back just a century ago, Singapore's story bears little resemblance to the powerful nation it is today. In fact, it was almost unrecognizable from the modern country the world now sees. And just like much of the world, it's a strange tale of great powers and colonialism. The countries we know today largely didn't exist in their modern form for long, and most borders shifted with the empires. That's especially the case for small, geographically important locations like Singapore. The first mention of Singapore is believed to be from the Greco-Roman astronomer Ptolemy, who named it Sabana and pointed to a location on the tip of what was believed to be the Malay Peninsula. It was mentioned more in Chinese literature, and in the centuries that followed, it was a holding of empires, including the Chola and the Srivijaya, and was visited by a Mongol Empire trade mission in 1320. By the 14th century, it was occupied by the Sultanate of Malacca, an Islamic empire based in what is now Malaysia. And then, as always, the Europeans came. The Portuguese were the first to arrive in the Malay archipelago, where Singapore was then little more than a key port. They quickly pushed back the Malacca Sultanate, which was declining in power, and soon controlled the ports. But empires ebb and fall, and by the 17th century, the Dutch were a rising power. Singapore was caught in the middle as the Dutch pushed out the first colonial masters and soon instituted a trade monopoly. And there was one product more valuable than any other: spice. And one empire would be ready to go across the world for it. The spice trade in the 17th and 18th centuries was a massive business, with empires taking what they wanted from their colonies and shipping it back home. This legacy of colonialism still continues to influence the countries to this day. In the Netherlands, Indonesian curries are still considered an essential fixture of Dutch cuisine. But while the Dutch had consolidated their hold over Singapore, there was another empire gaining in power and influence, and it was ready to make a big push in the region. Because, for a while, the sun never set on the British Empire. Under the Dutch, the British were kept to a limited presence in the region, but they were expanding rapidly in the region. The British East India Company was quickly becoming one of the most powerful trading corporations in the world. And in 1818, Sir Stamford Raffles was appointed as the Lieutenant Governor of the British colony in Bencoolen, found on the southwestern coast of Sumatra. He was an ambitious man and was determined to break the Dutch blockade and replace the Dutch as the dominant power in the region. This would open a massive trade corridor between China and British India, which went through Dutch territory. And Singapore was in the perfect spot. Raffles picked Singapore as the site for a new British base in the region, which was an easier approach than to confront one of the Dutch bases directly. After getting approval from the Governor-General of India, Raffles set sail for Singapore in 1819 and quickly approved of its location on the tip of the Malay Peninsula. The area was administered by the Dutch, but was officially ruled by the Sultan of Johor. Getting the locals on his side would help Raffles gain authority in the region, and there was one foolproof way to do that: a family feud. A coalition of locals were loyal to the Sultan's exiled older brother, Tengku Long, and Raffles was able to smuggle him back into Singapore. After offering him the backing of the British, Long was able to take over the region and declare himself the Sultan of Johor. The British were happy to offer him a handsome stipend for his rule in exchange for one favor: the right to establish a British trading post in Singapore. The deal was made official with the Treaty of Singapore on February 6, 1819, and the first step to modern Singapore was taken, and it would be a meteoric rise from there. While the island of Singapore initially had a population of just around 1,000 people, it soon became a destination for waves of Chinese migrants, followed by Indian immigrants. Soon, foreign-born residents far outnumbered the Singaporeans, although many were only there to work and soon returned home. But as the region became more and more known as a good place to do business, some chose to stay, kicking off the multinational vibe of Singapore that continues to this day. And soon, it was boom time. Raffles would soon return to his home base, with Major William Farquhar taking over. Raffles had designated Singapore a free port, so it quickly became popular as a place to do business, especially among those who wanted to avoid Dutch restrictions. Chinese and Arab traders quickly started making their way to the island, and only a few years after it was founded, $22 million of trade volume was coming into the island each year. But when Raffles returned to the port, he wasn't pleased, because his successor had turned the port into a den of vice. And under Farquhar's leadership, growth was the order of the day, by any means necessary. Gambling and opium dens were allowed with the proper license, and more shockingly, the slave trade had found a haven there. Raffles felt like he needed to take a firmer hand with the region, and quickly passed new laws that banned gambling, drugs, and slavery. It also prohibited carrying weapons, which was a rarity for those days, and soon Singapore became known as the most orderly port in the region, something that continues to this day. Raffles was a fan of order, and he divided Singapore into subdivisions that created ethnic neighborhoods, and that was just the start of his reforms. After firing Farquhar, he appointed John Crawford as the new governor, a man after his own heart. Crawford was a fan of efficiency and expansion, and he had soon signed another treaty with the Sultan to take over the majority of the island. By 1824, the Sultan had officially ceded Singapore to the East India Company, and any remaining obstacles to British rule were removed, including the rival empire. While the Dutch initially planned to try to drive the British out of the region, they were stunned by how fast Singapore grew. And by 1824, they signed a treaty acknowledging Britain's possession of the region. They soon incorporated Penang and Malacca into the Straits settlement, all administered under one authority, and this was perfectly timed, as trade and ocean travel was entering a massive boom period. The Chinese market was opening up, massive steamships sailed the seas, and the Suez Canal had made access to the Indian Ocean easier than ever. The population continued to grow, and by now was majority Chinese. But the small colony may not have been prepared for just how big things were going to get. Later administrators, usually British men detailed from India, were concerned with trade, but not so much with the local population. The colony was designed as a port, and its population was far too large for the small civil service it had. Overcrowding, disease, and the return of vices like gambling and drugs caused Singapore to start deteriorating. That led to a boom in gang activities as Chinese gangs battled for turf and the limited resources available for locals. It seemed like Singapore was suddenly on a downward spiral, and the rest of the British Empire would soon follow. In 1867, Britain decided to make Singapore a separate crown colony, allowing it far more direct leadership with a government appointed directly. While there were improvements, including a ban on secret societies, an administrator for the Chinese population, and a local newspaper, Singapore continued to struggle through the decades. World War I took a lot of the British resources in the early years of the 20th century, and a mutiny by British Indian soldiers brought conflict to Singaporean soil, but it was nothing compared to what was to come. World War I saw the beginning of the decline of the British Empire and the rise of the American and Japanese empires. As worries of another conflict grew, Britain shifted their focus from trade to military, and Singapore would become host to one of the largest overseas military bases in the world. Costing $500 million in 1939, the new naval base was impressive, but lacked a fleet, as British ships were occupied elsewhere. And once World War II broke out on European soil in 1939, Singapore was the least of Britain's priorities. But that was about to change. Singapore's darkest hour was fast approaching. Sir William Dobby had been appointed governor of Singapore in 1935, and he made the case for defending Singapore aggressively. But he wasn't heeded, and in 1942, the war would come home. After Pearl Harbor, Britain knew war with Japan was inevitable, and they believed that a Japanese attack was likely to come from the sea. But instead, Japanese forces came from the north, launching a sneak attack and quickly targeting the local infrastructure. The result was the worst British naval defeat of the war, and Allied air support didn't show up in time to hold Singapore. The islands were devastated, with heavy civilian casualties, and the Japanese tanks quickly ran through Singaporean defenses. The battle only lasted 55 days, as Singapore found itself under Japanese occupation. And this period would destroy almost everything that had been built. The Japanese were known for their harsh, brutal occupations, and this was no exception. Over 130,000 troops were taken as prisoners of war, and mass executions took as many as 50,000 civilian lives. Those who survived were forced into hard labor, particularly to build a railway between Thailand and what was then known as Burma. Much of the infrastructure was destroyed, and the country was heavily depopulated. The only way to ensure some level of protection was to collaborate with the Japanese occupiers. And when the occupation fell, people were shocked by what was left. Japan surrendered in August of 1945, and Lord Louis Mountbatten was sent in to receive the surrender and provide military administration during the rebuilding. But the city had already fallen into chaos. Looting and revenge killings were common, and there was no reliable electricity or water due to the Japanese bombing raids. Food was in short supply, and the harbor had been heavily damaged. As the infrastructure was slowly rebuilt, strikes and crime continued to be a problem. The economy started to recover as demand for tin and rubber increased around the world, but it would be a long journey for Singapore to get back to where it was. But today, few remnants remain of the brutal post-war period. Many things had been damaged in Singapore, but maybe none more than faith in the British. No one trusted them to protect the island anymore, and they demanded self-governance. With bigger concerns, the British acquiesced, and in 1947, the first legislative council was established to govern Singapore. An attempted communist coup in Malaya threatened the colony, and this slowed down progress on democracy for a while. But soon, things settled down, and over the next 16 years, Singapore established its own system of government, dominated by British subjects. It was an era of big changes, with Malaysia gaining its independence in 1963. Singapore wouldn't be far behind, as it soon had conflicts with the Malaysian government due to discrimination in favor of ethnic Malays. And there was only one way to avoid a civil war. The Malaysian Prime Minister would soon expel Singapore from its territory, and Singapore negotiated for its independence with Great Britain. As it became its own country in 1965, it faced an uncertain future, with a lack of natural resources, high unemployment, and a lack of housing and education infrastructure. But it had been looking to boost its economy quickly even before independence, and it had been rapidly industrializing. Soon, foreign investment came, and it established its own armed forces, heavily patterned after the Israeli Defense Forces, which secretly consulted with Singaporean leaders. But no one was prepared for what the 80s and 90s would bring. The transformation of Singapore is considered one of the most amazing economic stories of all time, as the country began to cultivate high-tech industries. Semiconductor manufacturing became one of its top industries as the electronic age began, and soon, unemployment was down to 3%. Not only did the port keep growing, but the country soon had an international airport and its own airline. Housing was developed in a hurry, and the country soon adapted to being an incredibly dense, urban country with a tight bundle of industries. And to manage a country like that, you need a certain kind of governing style. Singapore's early years as a country were dominated by conflict with left-wing activists, who hoped to see the country follow in the footsteps of neighbors like China, Laos, and Vietnam. But it wasn't the case. The People's Action Party, a right-wing technocratic governing coalition, quickly consolidated power and has kept it ever since. This is partially due to the population's fear of communism, but also because the party has proven itself capable of continuing to build the country's infrastructure and industry. And for that benefit, the people are willing to make some big compromises. Today, Singapore is a glittering city on a hill, one of the most promising countries in Southeast Asia. But is it a democracy? That depends on who you ask. The country is considered to have free and fair elections, with the left-wing Workers' Party allowed to sit in opposition. But the government is one of the most powerful in any country considered a democracy. Activists consider it an authoritarian government, and there is very little in the way of separation of powers. The media is regulated heavily, as are protest activities. But defenders of the leadership insist this is exactly what Singapore needs. The country is one of the safest in Asia, and that's often led to Singapore to wind up in the news for the wrong reasons. Singapore's history of criminal and gang activity has led the population to be very strongly in support of strict measures against crime and vice. The country has one of the strictest common law systems in any developed democratic country, with a wide swath of crimes being punishable by severe prison sentences or other sanctions. The justice system has a reputation as being highly efficient and generally without mercy. Its defenders say this is a critical part of keeping the machinery of Singapore humming along smoothly. But others ask, is it safe to visit? We've all read the stories of Americans being detained abroad, some for serious crimes, some for minor crimes, and some under suspicious circumstances. Some of them wind up serving lengthy prison terms. Others wind up being traded in political prisoner exchanges, while others wind up meeting a swift and terrible fate. But those most commonly happen in dictatorships like Russia. The general consensus among travel experts is that Singapore is a perfectly safe country to travel to as long as you don't do anything stupid. Unfortunately, that's way too much to ask for some people. Singapore's criminal law system is founded on principles very similar to the broken windows theory of policing. This states that small crimes should be prosecuted aggressively because it's the easiest way to catch major criminals or find fugitives. You nab a turnstile jumper, you might just find a wanted armed robber. So, Singapore maintains order by prosecuting even the smallest crimes with zeal. Littering, vandalism, and other public order offenses are likely to find a local who doesn't know the laws in criminal court. And one American found that out the hard way. It was most Americans' first impression of Singapore. and it wasn't a good one. In 1993, 19-year-old American Michael Fay was traveling through Asia. In what can only be described as a reckless teenage moment, he went on a 10-day vandalism spree in Singapore, stealing road signs and damaging 18 cars along the way. He was arrested, pled guilty, and he and many other Americans were shocked when he was sentenced to judicial caning. Singapore still uses corporal punishment for offenses like vandalism. But this isn't a minor punishment. It involves a thick rattan cane and can cause severe bruising and bleeding. Fay received a sentence of 6 strokes, but it was reduced to 4 after an appeal for leniency directly from President Bill Clinton. The incident made many Americans more cautious of visiting Singapore. For Singapore residents, this kind of strict enforcement of the law is a fact of life, and caning is the least of the possible punishments. Older Singaporean residents remember well the days of disorder and violence, and they strongly support government efforts to rein in chaos before it happens. Not only are caning, fines, and prison sentences possible for crimes, but Singapore has a death penalty that's used more liberally than it is in most democracies. Capital punishment is allowed for murder, terrorism, illegal use of firearms, kidnapping, and drug trafficking. And that last one is where foreigners can run into trouble. It's not uncommon to hear about tourists being tricked into carrying drugs into foreign countries, or doing it in the hopes of a fast payday. While most executions for drug trafficking in Singapore have been of locals, Dutch national Johan van Dam was executed in 1994 despite protests from his home country and even the Dutch royal family. Singapore argues that it will not grant clemency to foreign prisoners because its justice system is harsh, but above all else, equal. And that's the only way it can maintain order. It's a stance that enjoys widespread public support, especially because it has helped keep one type of crime firmly under control: corruption. That's one of the key reasons Singapore ranks among the best places in the world to do business. It's not just built for commerce and global travel, it also boasts one of the lowest corruption rates on the planet, creating a level playing field that few countries can match. Prior to 1950, gang activity was common, and most towns were ruled by corrupt local officials. Rooting out white-collar crime was one of Singapore's top priorities after independence. And today, the country is ranked 3rd out of 180 countries in terms of least corrupt public sector. Corruption is treated just as seriously as any other crime in Singapore. And there's an agency solely dedicated to rooting it out. The Corrupt Practices Investigation Bureau has been active in investigating not just corrupt businesses, but politicians as well. Even in countries with bans on graft, many of them still allow influence peddling and lobbying among the political sector. Singapore has been cracking down on that for decades. One of the most prominent cases came in 1966, as a minister for national development lost his position for cutting behind-the-scenes deals with Boeing aircraft in exchange for stock shares. Since then, plenty of businessmen and politicians have found themselves in the dock. It's not that corruption doesn't exist in Singapore, it's that it's incredibly hard to get away with it, and the punishment is harsh for betrayal of the public trust. And that has created a perfect storm for success. If you ask most people why Singapore is so successful today, they'll typically mention one name: Lee Kuan Yew, the first Prime Minister of Singapore. He had an abnormally long tenure for a democratically elected leader, serving from 1959 to 1990. That's given him a huge profile in the country that dwarfs even founding fathers like George Washington. He saw the country through the growing pains of independence right through to the beginning of its boom period. He quickly identified Singapore's greatest possible asset, human capital. His founding of the Economic Development Board made expanding Singapore's investments the country's top priority. And his tenure saw cascading success after success. And it's continued continued to this day. By the end of his tenure, Singapore's capital stock had increased by a whopping 33 times. The country's standard of living had increased massively, with it estimated that over 80% of the population qualify as middle-class homeowners or above. As manufacturing shifted and became a smaller percentage of Singapore's economy, the country pivoted and became a key hub for banking, trading, and international business. That diversification led to the country's reputation as a glittering city on a hill. And with that reputation, it's not surprising that people keep coming. The country faced a major test during the 2008 financial crisis, which hit the entire world due to massive stock downturns. But surprisingly, Singapore dealt with it far better than most. The economy grew by 3.1% in 2009 and then a whopping 15.2% in 2010. And the country quickly got the reputation of being able to weather the storm. While growth would vary over the next few years, the trend was only going in one direction, up. And people and businesses continued to rush to invest in the fast-growing economy. And one of the reasons things are going so well is because Singapore has a little bit of everything. Singapore's banking sector is seen as a hub for many currencies, with much online banking going through there. It's picked up a lot of the business that Swiss banks used to hold. Its biotechnology sector is one of the fastest growing right now, with top drug makers setting up plants in Singapore and the industry climbing towards 10% of the country's manufacturing sector. Its powerful oil industry continues to be a major factor in the economy, although its small surface area has largely left it out of the renewable energy boom. And its real estate industry continues to sell top destinations to high rollers. But there's one industry that's likely to keep growing more than any other. Tourism has become the cornerstone of many economies, especially as Western countries move industries overseas. While Singapore doesn't rely entirely on tourism for its economy, it's become a massive hub, with an estimated 16.5 million tourists visiting the country from abroad in 2024 alone, which is almost 3 times the country's population. The country may not have the attractions of places like Abu Dhabi or Dubai, but it's often been floated as a contender for major developments, including a Disney park. However, that honor ultimately went to Hong Kong. But it might have something even more important: nature. Singapore has been selling itself as a sustainable tourism destination and labels itself as a city in nature. The Singapore Botanic Gardens are one of the country's most popular tourism sites, and the country is seen as one of the most accessible destinations in the world. Not only is almost the entire country covered by the mass rapid transit system, but English is the dominant language in the country, making it a popular starter destination for tourists visiting Asia for the first time. The central city was the 4th most visited city in the world in 2017, and it's not hard to see why. At night, the entire place turns into a kaleidoscope of glittering color, as all the massive attractions are illuminated. The skyline of Singapore boasts some incredible sights, including the Singapore Flyer, a towering observation wheel. If you want to shop till you drop, the Ion Orchard is one of the most impressive shopping malls in the world, which raises the question, is anything gonna stop Singapore's rise? The country has weathered many crises over its short time as a country and is seen as a model for formerly colonized countries in building their own economy. But it's not the only fast-advancing country in Asia, with South Korea and Taiwan also growing and industrializing incredibly fast. And looming over it all is China, the world's 2nd largest economy, actively working to expand its influence across Asia while seeking to undermine US presence both diplomatically and militarily. And Singapore might be right in its path. In recent years, China has become infamous for building artificial islands around the South China Sea. It's been laying claim to swaths of international water, essentially daring anyone in the region to stop them. While Singapore is on the border of the South China Sea, it hasn't been directly threatened by China yet. However, as China expands, it's likely to see the capitalist, America-friendly bastion of Singapore as a potential rival in the region, and everyone there is planning for a potential confrontation. And their best weapon might not be a weapon at all. Singapore has built deep economic cooperation with many of the world's top democracies. It has billions of American and European dollars in its bank accounts, as well as heavy export deals with them. Additionally, it has a large number of international citizens calling it home, and an even larger number of international tourists visiting every day. It's turned itself into a key pillar of the global economy. If that's threatened by a neighbor, it would likely have those interests protecting it. That makes it likely that an ambitious China might decide to look for easier areas to expand into, and give Singapore a wide berth unless a larger war breaks out. And that follows the principle that Singapore has been following since it gained its independence. There is nothing better for a developing country than investments, and no better way to establish itself on the world stage than by making deals. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. It really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MatPack.